Welcome back, everybody. This is the Phragmites Control Strategies, Considerations, and Case Studies webinar for land managers. As we said earlier, if you have questions, enter them into the chat box. For information about continuing education credits, there's a form to fill out that's available on our website at lisma.org. It's Lisma with 2 I's, lisma.org, under the News and Events tab. If you have any other questions, you can email Lindsay, our Field Project and Outreach Coordinator, and Lindsay will put her email address in the chat box again. Our next presenters are Karen Lombard and Nina Coleman. Karen has been working in stewardship and restoration with the Nature Conservancy since 1997 and with the Conservancy in Massachusetts since 1999. Karen leads a TNC stewardship team that manages 31 nature preserves. Karen has more than 20 years of experience in preserve management and restoration, including floodplain forests and sandplain grassland restoration, prescribed fire, and invasive plant control. Nina Coleman has been the Sandy Neck Park Manager for the town of Barnstable on Cape Cod since 2003. Nina spends her time balancing the ecological needs of a dynamic and sensitive beach system with several rare species with the demands of human recreational activities. When the crowds recede, Nina can be found rescuing sea turtles, educating school children about the natural wonders of Cape Cod, and restoring wetlands on 4,500 acres of Sandy Neck Beach Park. Please welcome Karen and Nina.
Is that working out? You guys see the split screen on mine?
No, we can see the full slide on yours.
Yeah, that looks better for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Can you see a weird green square around it like I can? Or
No,
I think that
we
might
don't
be
s-
Zoom.
we
Okay,
don't
great.
see that. Yeah.
All right.
It looks
You're
good
all
now.
set then, Karen and Nina.
I'm
Just let me know when to
missing-
change.
I'm missing a little bit of the bottom of the slide, but maybe that isn't critical. I don't know if you are. So, okay. Anyway, Nina and I are really excited to share with you this 20-year project and partnership. We feel like it's a story of like luck and persistence. And for both of us, it was kind of the start of our career. Nina was doing a master's. I was my first big restoration project. And we hope it serves as both inspiration or perhaps even a cautionary tale as we share our lessons learned. Next. So Sandy Neck is a 6.5-mile long barrier beach on Cape Cod Bay, which shelters the second largest salt marsh in Massachusetts. It's owned and operated by the town of Barnstable, and it's a really important recreational site, as well as great natural history site. It's an area of critical environmental concern in Massachusetts, which adds another regulatory layer for any projects that are done out there because it has a lot of state and federally listed species. It's a dune system on the scale of the Cape Cod National Seashore, really spectacular and probably not as well known. The Nature Conservancy became interested in the site because we did some ecoregional planning to identify the most important sites for biodiversity on the Atlantic coast. And this one popped up for its maritime forest and dune swale system. And at that time, we did a site conservation plan about 2000 and identified the Phragmites, the threat of Phragmites as an important threat to the site, particularly the dunes and swales. And then at that point, I approached the town of Barnstable about a partnership in terms of getting rid of the Phragmites on the site. Next, please. So as Nina mentioned, the interior of the beach, it's, you know, a huge acreage of this beautiful undeveloped dune system. It's home to approximately 300 interdunal swales, or isolated freshwater wetlands, which are a reflection of the groundwater. And there are a bunch of different types, but the cranberry swale, actually we'll see, the cranberry, you can see up on the top right, the cranberry swale is typical. About half of the 300 swales had some level of Phragmites invasion. Early on, this is probably because it started in the early 90s after Hurricane Bob and the perfect storm, where rhizomes were going to wash over from very extensive Phragmites invasions closer to the mainland of the Cape. The Nature Conservancy was made aware of the Phragmites threats due to inventory by Julie Lundgren, who many of you know works for the New York Heritage Program now, and when she visited the site to assess its condition as part of our ecoregional planning. Next. So in 2000, as I was getting started, I'm reaching out to the town. I was, you know, was anybody working out here? And Nina popped up, the conservation agent in the town said that there was someone out there inventorying the swales. And Nina was just starting her master's degree at UMass and had mapped all of the swales. And so we used her maps to get started. The Phragmites invasion is treated with glyphosate, and the removal has mostly been snip and drip, and it was a fairly young invasion, so we use that technique to protect the native plant understory. You can see on the left where there's a lot of native plants still under the Phragmites. We had also swales that were completely Phragmites covered, where we could use spray as well. All right, next. So by 2009, so I started treating in 2002. By 2009, there were 99 swales treated. This was roughly about 14 hectares. And we used 2 to 4 person, like AmeriCorps type crews, which we hired for 6 weeks from August to October. The project cost about 15 to 20K per year, which I was able to obtain from NRCS and US Fish and Wildlife partner grants. You know, the whole project cost about $110,000 if you don't include the overhead. It took, let's see, pre-restoration, let's go to next, sorry. So I quantified the restoration success in a 2009 paper, which is available. Lindsay has that available. And we looked at all 99 swales, and pre-restoration, these swales were evenly divided between 3 density categories. So low, medium, and high, you can see on the left, they're pretty evenly divided. By 2009, we were able to shift the Phragmites densities towards the none and low categories. And in 2002, 15% of the swales were high density. By 2009, 1.5% were high density. So really in those first 7 years, we really decreased the density. And 79% at that point had no or low density. But it took 5 to 7 years to get to the point where we were starting to see this low and none and low density. And sometimes the Phragmites would pop up again after a year where we didn't see it. So really, you know, after I left the project in 2009, Nina really started to see this more and more as she went on, where you get more and more swales with none or none or low density. So we also, you know, track costs and personnel hours and glyphosate, and all were reduced significantly over time. You know, the cost per hectare went from 3,000 to 1,000 per hectare. The personnel hours decreased significantly from 131 to 77 hours. And at the end, we could use just 2 people for 4 weeks and shift most of the treatment to the fall, rather than the late summer where it's more effective. And then the glyphosate was reduced significantly from 10 liters per hectare to 1 liter per hectare. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina now to talk about her 11 years.
Thank you, Karen. I'll take the next slide, please. Thank you. So Nina Coleman, Sandy Neck Park Manager and Director of Natural Resources. I'm excited to talk about this project that we've been working on and the partnership that we've had with TNC for many years now. I think it is a success, and I'm excited to talk about lessons learned. So first of all, early 2000s, as Karen mentioned, I was working on my master's thesis at Sandy Neck on this topic. So this was pre-employment with the town of Barnstable. My preliminary research was really kind of the backbone of being able to justify this project to the town, and some of the research, basic questions we were able to answer early on was that in interdunal swales, Phragmites decreases native plant density and richness, particularly in heavily invaded swales. And cutting plus herbicide was 95% more effective than removal with cutting alone. And those are pretty obvious answers, but when you're trying to sell it to a town and sell herbicide application to the citizenry, it's important that we do have that basic knowledge to be able to go into these projects. As Karen mentioned, I also started an extensive mapping and cataloging of the swales, which has been evolving for many years now. And this is a representation of what that looks like, our working map. So what you're seeing here is a little sliver of our 6.5 mile long beach. This is less than a mile, so you can imagine how many wetlands we're dealing with. And what you're seeing here is the green areas are swales where frag has never been observed. The red areas are swales, and you can see they're numbered, so they have a unique number. The red are swales where frag was and continues to be observed at some level. And the yellow are swales where frag has not been observed in the last 5 years. So we're considering those restored, but still checking them now and then. Also in the picture is the orange along the seam of the salt marsh. Those were stands of Phragmites. It was really starting to fire up along our salt marsh, as well as Phragmites on the front beach and a dredging spoil deposit in front of our parking lots was another area that one looks a little weird, but I wanted to clarify that. Next, please. Yeah, so unfortunately, through this transition, Karen and I knew that this was going to be a technical nightmare. This whole project is preparing for this. So I'm missing a slide. So I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to miss 2 slides in here. But why don't we go back one and I'll continue working on that one. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I took over the project back from Karen in 2009 as the park manager, so as a town employee. And I would say since her research, we have continued to move the needle in the right direction. Almost all swales are presenting with, and the salt marsh are only presenting with a few stems a year. And we moved into a maintenance phase, which was about 2 staff members about 2 weeks a year addressing these swales. We use 2 to 3 gallons of herbicide for the whole 4,500 acres. And most of the time is spent going from swale to swale. So because of that, we ended up doing half the beach one year and the other half the other year. So it was every other year for our visiting of the interdunal swales. We're still dealing with this pesky reemergence, so we won't see any Phragmites for a long period of time. And then presumably the rhizome has been just lying there waiting for the right opportunity and fires back up. And that's been frustrating because we haven't quite pushed some of these areas into what we would call restored. Next slide, please. Great, so so lessons learned is kind of the rest of what I want to talk about. Lessons learned, this partnership that we've had with Nature Conservancy and other organizations has been vital because this is a long-term commitment. The other lesson that what Karen already talked about is that this project is going to have to continue on in perpetuity. And that of course is not what you want to think when you start something like this, but you know, once we really got into it, once we looked at Karen's research and then moving forward, it was clear that this would have to be a long-term commitment from the town. We've already put a lot of effort into it, a lot of herbicide, you know, use initially. And so it's easier to justify the maintenance phase at this point because we've really gained control of this Phragmites, and now we're just trying to hold things status quo. And then finally, the storm surge issue. So, you know, climate change is obviously something we're all talking about. And we had not one, but two 100-year storms in 2008. We had a very large storm surge come into the interior of the beach. And many of our fragile wetlands were affected. So what we had from that was a very aggressive colonization in areas that had never seen Phragmites before, which unfortunately I had a picture of. But many of these interior wetlands were suddenly being invaded again. And it really was that first growing season that was imperative that we got out there and regained control. And it took 2 years, and I would say we're back under control. Many of our wetlands were negatively affected, and our beach is extremely susceptible to future storm surges. Next, please. Great. So my other lesson learned that I'm sure everybody has already talked about this, but the thatch removal is one of my battle cries whenever anybody wants to talk about Phragmites. The picture on the left is a wetland that we had removed. We had sprayed for multiple years in a row, and we had killed the live Phragmites. So really what was left after killing the frag was a big, muddy, mosquito-ridden bowl of thatch. And really nothing was happening in that wetland with regard to native plants. In the fall, the picture of the picture was taken. We had AmeriCorps. They removed the thatch, put it in the upland. And it was that following spring. That's a picture on the right of the same perspective. The seed bank germinated and really just blossomed. And that wetland began what I would say its healing process at that point. So this is, in this ecosystem, this is consistent with what I found with my research. I found that keeping other variables consistent, thatch reduced plant density by 95%, which is maybe in part due to the thatch's ability to reduce temperature fluctuations. So many of our wetland seeds are waiting for that spring water drawdown, which increases obviously the temperature fluctuations, and that signals germination. So that's kind of my running hypothesis on this topic. We had some heavily invaded swales, and we definitely believed that it was worth the effort. Thankfully, we had AmeriCorps to get all of that dead material out of those areas and give them a fighting chance. Next slide, please. All right, so I know it's a Phragmites conference, but I want to give a shout out to some of the other invasive work that we've been doing over these last 20 years. We didn't stop at Phragmites. We have been doing removal of rusty willow, which is a tricky one. That's a wetland willow. So we're seeing it moving into our interdural swales and definitely misbehaving. So we started working on that using herbicide chainsaw and then a herbicide paint on the stump. We also are very fortunate to be in an extremely sandy environment. So popping some of these other plants out with a shovel is extremely satisfying and extremely easy. So the other plants that we've been working on with just staff and a shovel is purple loosestrife, which isn't as big of an issue, but certainly something that could have gotten out of control in our freshwater wetlands. This really naughty one, spotted knapweed, which is the picture on the left, it's sort of thistly looking. That guy is an upland dune plant, came in really quick, and it does secrete an exclusion chemical. And so I had some extra time with some staff, and I started having them pull it out of that primary dune. about 10 years ago. And what I've seen, and we've got it under control at Sandy Neck, but what I've seen on some of the other beaches that I take care of, that we didn't do this, that it has pretty much taken over that primary dune, and I'm concerned about how that's going to affect erosion. So spotted knapweed has been one we've been after. And then this panicum, and I'm sure some of us have been dealing with this panicum. It looks like a switchgrass, but it's a lot more robust looking. There's a picture of it on the right there. Karen started with that many years ago, pulling that out. This plant is troublesome because I'm finding it in dunes, I'm finding it in freshwater wetlands, I'm finding it in salt marsh. The niche is very large. It's hybridizing with switchgrass. So we've been at that. Fortunately, it was a fairly new invasion in the first mile of beach. So I think we got that one under control as well. So rather than ending with the misery of storm surge and climate change, I wanted to provide those other little success stories. And I think we both look forward to your questions.
That was great. Thank you. And I love how you stress the importance of perpetual maintenance. Us invasive species people sometimes like to hit and run and never come back. And then when we come back 15 years later, everything is back to the way it was. So thank you for all that. It's great work you're doing. Thank you. Now we do have questions in the chat. Can you see the chat? Either of you? Or I could read them out if you can't see them.
Yeah, I've been watching them come in. Let's see. Nina, can you see the chat too? The first one is from Polly about the persistence of the seed bank of Phragmites post-management. We don't know a ton about the seed bank because I think a lot of the infestation is from rhizomes out there. I mean, when we started this project, they used to say this, Phragmites didn't spread by seed very much. I think that was debunked from what I gather, because we found Phragmites in places where the rhizome couldn't get to. But I do think in terms of the surge and the amount of Phragmites on Cape Cod and then the other side of the Great Marsh, that most of it is from rhizome.
I would agree with that, and particularly with this storm surge event. Unfortunately, the picture wasn't up, but I just can't imagine that these robust stands that were already, in flower, could have come from a seed. It really had to be from something with a little more energy.
And then Nina, Samantha's asking, treating after storm surge because of freshwater runoff?
The storm surge was saltwater into freshwater wetlands. That was, basically burning the freshwater native plant material because the saltwater was sitting on there and burning that. And with that came the Phragmites. So not runoff. It's a sandy environment. We really don't have sheet flow unless it's storm surge.
And then can Phragmites grow in the sand of the dunes if the roots can reach water far below?
The stuff is everywhere, popping right out of the dunes. It's very nasty.
Okay, and then Bruce is asking us regarding the recalcitrant reemergences, have we considered digging them up by hand? Should be possible in sandy areas, even if not in peat and more organic sites.
I don't think digging up is the way to go. I think it would be way more disturbance. Some of these areas have very intact, sensitive vegetation and also state listed plants. So I think we would make a real mess if we tried to do that.
And then Steve is asking best tools to remove the thatch. What did you guys have the AmeriCorps?
Young people.
Did you use rakes, like a metal rake or a...
Yeah, we used rakes, AmeriCorps, and buckets. You can see, and I was trying to illustrate these wetlands. I mean, they're fairly small, and so we would just put them in those big buckets and drag it to the upland and leave the thatch in the upland, and that seemed to be fine.
Okay. Do we, in this project or other projects, have we ever tested soil or water for herbicide remnants?
Nope.
No, we have not. So regarding digging them by hand, does a weed wrench or extractigator work? tools that use leverage like a weed wrench, yeah, to pull plants up with a significant amount of root.
Yeah, I've been really, it works, a shovel works really well with the spotted knapweed and the panicum. The seedling rusty willow, I've done well with some of those tools. There's a couple of different ones that I can't remember their names, but those have worked, and I'd rather not use that much herbicide. And those are difficult when you have a whole lot of those little seedling woody plant material.
And then what time of year do we conduct our herbicide application? It's pretty much after Labor Day into early October, wouldn't you say, Nina?
Yeah, absolutely. Fall. There's some research out there that it'd be good if we got it in June as well, but it's just always too busy. I did do some of my master's research around Plymouth gentian and determined that that was also the best time of the year to do it for that plant, to have the least amount of negative effect on that state listed plant.
Yeah, Nina's got piping plovers and lots of off-road vehicles during the main season. It's pretty tough to do anything. So someone is saying continuous care and maintenance, the definition of a steward. Great job. Thank you.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah. Do you cut and wipe or something else?
Karen, why don't you talk about, like, in the early days, it was more the bloody glove and all that.
Yeah, we did. We did a lot of bloody glove and cut and drip, and then some spraying. And I think the cut and drip was the most successful.
And at this point, it's just the odd plant, so it's a cut and drip, very much so.
These little reemergences of these multi-stemmed frags are really challenging, and cut and drip, they're almost too small, so we would swipe those still. And then Polly's saying, interesting about Panicum mariolum being considered invasive. Isn't it expanding its native range from New Jersey north along the shoreline as a result of climate change? Yeah, Les Meerhoff was the one that pointed this out to us, and he had said it was native to the dunes in the southern US. And at that point, this was 20 years ago, we were really not thinking as much about climate change. And at this point, I think we just have shown, it looks like it could take over a lot of the dune swale habitat. So it's hard to consider letting it go again. Nina, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've moved into more like the manager eye versus the scientific eye, and that thing is out of control. It really would take over. Very, very robust. Almost looks like an ornamental out of control. Has that kind of vibe. And the niche that I see it growing in all these different habitats concerns me as well. And then the hybridizing with what appears to be switchgrass, I'm not even sure, but that concerns me as well. So I'm going to keep the pedal down on that one.
After spraying, Natalie asks, after spraying and removing frag, are natives immediately planted in place, and any glyphosate effect on natives?
We never plant. We try to keep Sandy Neck as pure as possible. So, and she bounces right back very quickly. We got this. We've got a lot of these invasions at the early end of things, so we really had a lot of seed bank and native plants already ready to get going again. So no planting. Herbicide was another one of my master's thesis topics. So I shouldn't have taken on too many topics, but I did. It was basically the herbicide, the cut plots versus herbicide and cut plots both had loss of native vegetation from just the disturbance of going in there. The herbicide had a little bit more, but on particular types of plants, but just going in and just the act of restoring and going in and cutting has in and of itself some loss of native vegetation, but the research showed that everything bounced right back. So that really justified the use of herbicide, because without it, it would have been 100% frag within a couple of years again.
Roger's saying machetes and potato forks work well for removal.
Great.
Natalie's asking, how is Frag disposed of? Can it be used for anything useful afterwards?
You don't know.
Yeah. I mean, just put in the upland. I don't think it was too much to take it out. The panicum we've taken out because of seed heads, but the Phragmites, I mean, just the scale of this site and the difficulty of travel is challenging. So we found that by putting it next to the swale in the upland, it really didn't cause any problems once cut. Please explain bloody glove. I assume that's not an OJ reference in this context. That's just dipping a cotton glove, having a cotton glove over your nitrile gloves and then dipping it in herbicide and swiping it up and down the plant. Polly's saying the panicum is highly recommended for shoreline restoration by, I don't know what, SWCDM and NRCS. And Jane is saying Phragmites works well as a fire starter. I mean, I think Phragmites is pretty scary to burn, and it, you know, but it might be fine out here, but just the logistics of pulling off burns out in this environment would be pretty challenging. So that's it.
All right, wonderful. That was an excellent presentation. Lots of great information. Thank you very much, Karen and Nina. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you all for inviting us.
All right. Our next presenter is Roger Wolf. Roger has worked for 34 years as an environmental scientist, working in mosquito control and coastal wetland management and restoration. Roger has spent 12 years with the Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife and 22 years with the Connecticut DEEP. His career is focused on coastal wetlands, developing and promoting integrated marsh management, which incorporates wetland restoration, wildlife habitat enhancement, salt marsh mosquito control, invasive plant management, and coastal resiliency. Please welcome Roger.
Very good. Can y'all see me?
I can, yes, Roger. Hi.
Do I share the screen here? Or do I?
Yes,
Yeah.
you should be able to share your screen. Yeah. There you go.
Get this. Oh. Getting there.
That's
How are
it.
we looking?
Looks good.
Hey.
Ready to go.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to talk about our program, our Marsh program in Connecticut a little bit, something we've been doing for a number of years here now. And focus primarily as we were doing here on Phragmites. Well, I think we've seen enough frag today. I think we all know what that's all about. And certainly a concern in here in Connecticut, both along the coast and in inland sites as well, freshwater sites. We do practice a concept, I guess, if you will, a practice of what we call integrated marsh management in Connecticut, particularly along our coastal sites, which is a holistic approach to wetland management using a variety of techniques to achieve site-specific goals. That can be fairly simple or complex. They look at the many aspects of management, including, you know, not only mosquito control, that's one of my primary focuses, but also vegetation management, wildlife habitat enhancement, hydrologic modification, and certainly education, because we don't work in a vacuum and we certainly can't do this all on our own. And it does often involve partnerships to share resources, be it equipment, technical expertise, funding. Here's kind of a schematic of what that looks like from an integrated marsh management perspective. And not only in mosquito control, but also for vegetation management, wildlife habitat enhancement, salt marsh restoration. So many different things go into this. Number of alternatives out there for controlling invasives. Many of you, I'm sure, well aware of these. Along the coast, we do, where we can, a lot of tidal saltwater restoration, tidal flow restoration. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Phragmites tends to not tolerate salinities over 18 parts per thousand. So if we can reintroduce tidal salt water into these situations, it has been shown to knock back the Phragmites. Chemical control has been a fair amount talked about chemical control today. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Where we have the luxury, if you will, we can go in and do mowing in between seasons, in the off season. We don't really do any burning in Connecticut. I know other states do, particularly down in Mid-Atlantic, where they've got large open expanses of marsh areas. Our marshes are just too small. Our air standards are such, and the fire hazards are such that we just can't do any real effective burning for Phragmites. And in many cases, it's just a little too wet. It's just too wet to even get an effective frag fire. I know frag fires can be nasty and hot and dangerous. And that's largely why we can't do them or don't do them, because we've got smaller, 10, 20, 30, couple dozen acre sites that are bordered by multi-million-dollar homes. So in most cases, burning's not an option. There has been some record shown of flooding of cut stems, where you have an impoundment situation where you can control or manipulate water levels. Also on a very small scale, doing things like covering with plastic to shade out the cut stems. As many of you know, Phragmites is extremely tough, and it's very difficult to respond to something like that. So again, on a very small scale, it might show some promise, but again, from a larger operational scale, it's just not practical. Biological control, Dr. Blasi was talking about that earlier today. I think we're still waiting for that silver bullet. Fantastic. Other, perhaps more extreme things of cutting up or disking. I know they had tried some of this in New Jersey, and I don't believe it was too awful successful. Tends to chop up the rhizomes and even spread them even more, perhaps. We have done some fill removal projects in the past where Phragmites had become established in disturbed sites, and we dug out, dredged, basically excavated the fill material down to back to a reference marsh elevation. Even then you will get frag response, but if you can get the hydrology and the elevation correct, particularly in a tidal situation, it will eventually knock it back. It won't be an immediate effect. You will see frag still coming back even for several years after you've done a large scale excavation and dredging. I've seen some work on grazing. Again, I think it's pretty disruptive to a marsh area, perhaps out in the Great Lakes areas as well. We may hear more about this today. Again, on a local scale, perhaps it shows some promise as well. People have talked about hand pulling and hand digging. No, thank you. I'll leave it at that. If you want to tackle it, go ahead. Again, but from an operational standpoint, we're looking at a statewide program here. It's just not a practical option for us. So, talking a little bit about tidal flow restoration. Many of these coastal sites, particularly, Phragmites really took off and invaded in areas where there were undersized culverts installed. Tidal flow was restricted either through one-way flap gates, tide gates in the past. Again, this did not happen overnight. It was, these sites turned from open tidal saltwater flow to restricted restricted water flow, and many of these sites turned brackish as a result, and that's just ideal frag habitat. So the Phragmites is taken right in. So where we can, we try to restore or replace undersized culverts with larger ones, and if possible, remove them entirely, remove the tidal restriction to restore that tidal flow. And again, we've done sites like this as well. And I'll mention also here, many of our earlier tide gates or our earlier tidal systems had one-way tide gates or flap gates installed. We know that if we can manipulate some of these, or where feasible, even remove the flap gates altogether to fully restore tidal flow. It may take 15 years to really knock back the Phragmites in these sites, but it does work. If you can restore that tidal saltwater flow in these systems, it really can knock it back just on its own, just by restoring the hydrology and the salinity. More work being done now, these self-regulating tide gates particularly in areas of restricted tidal flow where you can't, it's just impossible to fully restore full tidal flow because of upstream development. Now, if you pull off the tide gate, you're going to flood everybody else upstream. It was built down into the floodplain over the years. So these SRTGs will allow some level of tidal flow back into these systems before the floats will close the gates at a preset level. Another quick and dirty, I mentioned some of these are fairly simple. Just selective channel recleaning. We've gone into some of these marshes. Usually it's not a frag issue, pardon me, but where you've got sites that have been plugged off, just vegetation growing in or infilling of some of the channels. And we've gone in and reclaimed some of these areas. And then in this case, within 2 or 3 growing seasons, we fully restored it to native vegetation. Again, remove that excess sheet water, standing sheet water, and get some tidal flushing in and out of that system. Reduce the sulfides, reduce the salts, and the vegetation recovery can be phenomenal in some of these areas. So that's another form of what I would consider a simple approach to tidal flow restoration in some of these areas. Herbicides, we've talked about herbicides already today. We found that a minimum of a 2 to 3 consecutive year herbicide application is needed. We use primarily, again, products containing glyphosate or imazapyr. And it does mean that we need to do follow-up applications, certainly. We talked about timing of year, and due to that aggressive above ground growth in the early part of the growing season and the starch reserves down in the rhizomes, late season applications are most effective, particularly with glyphosate or some type of systemic herbicide. You want to draw that down into the root system to kill it. We have gone with imazapyr as early as late June, usually by 4th of July, we can start spraying. It does give you a greater window of opportunity. You can actually even go back in, if you do an early application, you can come back in prior to first frost, for example, and do a second application if need be. Because it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to see results with imazapyr, we've found. Where you start to see that plant just starving itself out because of the action of the imazapyr. In Connecticut, if you're applying in a wetland, we talked about regulatory issues before. I'm not a regulator, I'm an end user as well. But the applicator must be licensed in aquatic pest control, that's category 5 in Connecticut. And they must obtain an aquatic pesticide permit from the Connecticut Pesticide Division. From an operational rule of thumb, I don't know if I should say this, but this is what, people call us all the time. I have a small stand along my pond or my yard. And when we say if it's on your own property and it's not in standing water, you could use an off-the-shelf product like Roundup. It's still the same active ingredients, still glyphosate, and it will work well in those situations. But by and large, larger stands, particularly if it's in a tidal situation or in water, yeah, you're going to need to get a permit for that and have a licensed applicator do it. Where again we have the opportunity to do this, our program has diminished somewhat over the last several years, so we can't always get back to these sites in the wintertime and mow the dead stems. But where we can do it, we will go out and mow, knock down the dead stems down kind of into pencil-sized pieces, little bits. That does aid in decomposition, removes that thatch layer to some extent. It does promote sunlight penetration to the ground surface and can encourage sprouting of the native seed bank. Site on the right is a site we've been working on for 5 years now in the lower Connecticut River, and we've got Walter's millet and some beautiful stuff. Narrowleaf cattails is the primary predominant down there. And yeah, if you get rid of that frag cover, there's no planting involved. We've never planted any sites. We just let the native seed bank come back in. I saw some earlier comments about stewardship and monitoring even from the last presentation. And anymore, I tell anybody, if you're going to get into this, you're going to be in it for the long haul. And I can imagine a lot of heads nodding out there right now, because as you know, this frag is tough stuff. The site pictured here is a site I've been working on for over 10 years. And I still go back every year with a backpack for half a day, walk around, and I still spot spray all the little stems, little pieces of frag that keep coming back because it's tough stuff, particularly in a tidal brackish situation. It's just ideal habitat for Phragmites. So again, the goal is control. I think we've heard earlier today that it will, if you can keep it under control, the native vegetation will pop up as well. It will coexist. So eradication may not necessarily be the goal, your ultimate goal. If you just keep it under control so the native vegetation can take off again, it'll coexist well. And there are certain areas actually where frag can be kind of beneficial, particularly for shoreline erosion, stream bank erosion control. It's tough to maintain and control, but it's a very effective erosion control. I know a lot of sites along the lower Connecticut River and along the coast where it actually captures a lot of debris coming down these rivers with the spring freshet. If you remove that frag cover, a lot of that stuff, the rack and debris just gets washed right into the marsh. So it can be an effective fence, if you will, to capture a lot of junk that just floats down the river. So it can have a purpose in the right setting. I do want to touch on one project that we work on in the lower Connecticut River. This is called Ward's Cove. About half the property is in state ownership as a wildlife management area. We've been working on this, well, actually, I'll give you a little history. This has been going on for over 20 years. The site has five listed plant species and 4 listed bird species in this marsh complex of about 250 some acres. We started a project back in 2000 with the Nature Conservancy and a number of other partners where we were able to secure funding. And this, again, initial work going on in this, we would do it for about 3 years. And back then, federal agencies were funding Phragmites control efforts. Again, looking for the quick and dirty, get in and out, 3 to 5 years, you're done with it. But as we know now, that's just, when you're dealing with frag, it's not going to happen. But we did 3 years of spraying while the funding held out. The Nature Conservancy continued with some of their own funding on their lands for another couple of years. But by and large, particularly in this lower Connecticut River setting, legal haline type of marsh, within 8 years, it was all back without doing anything. We did it for a couple of years, got really good control, and it just stopped. And within 8 years, it was all back. 220 some odd acres of Phragmites. So in 2016, local landowners down there again in the town of Lyme contacted us, said, we really don't like this frag, we want to get rid of it. So a number of partners have been involved again, working with Fish and Wildlife Service and Nature Conservancy, the town of Lyme, or Lyme Land Conservation Trust down there as well. We started another round of Phragmites. Both we had done the work ourselves on state property, and they had contracted with a private applicator to do work down there as well on the private lands. We're going into year 5 this year. Again, we have used either glyphosate or imazapyr at various concentrations, various methods of application, either by boat. A lot of it's done by boat where we can get access to. Otherwise, we have low ground pressure equipment that we can get across the marsh, either an Argo or a Marsh Master, and can do applications that way. Within a year, again, very good control. Within a year, we saw 85% reduction in the volume of product that we had to put out. It's difficult to monitor or say how much acreage control you have, because it'll just, still have to traverse the entire marsh and spot spray every little piece that keeps popping up. So it's difficult to get an acreage reduction when you're actually doing monitoring of this. Again, control was excellent where we got it. Again, the other co-dominant down there is narrowleaf cattail in the lower Connecticut River. So those areas were not treated. We did a rare plant assessment in 2017 and again in 2018 of our known species. There was an earlier assessment done back in 2001 as part of our earlier efforts. We found that a lot of these plants have expanded their range down in that area, particularly the bulbochinus, which is a bulrush, a salt marsh rush down there, really expanded over the last 4 years largely because of our efforts. You get rid of the frag cover, and this stuff is popping up all over the place. It's nice to see. It's very beautiful to see. Other invasives, I mentioned we do other invasive plant control. We have been working a lot in the last 5 years or so on our state properties. Again, we used to do back from 98 on, since we really got into the frag control effort. We were working all over the place, kind of following the money trail back then, where the funding was available. We would work on private, state, federal land, wherever we could. Our program has been reduced. As I mentioned, a lot of federal agencies aren't even funding frag control efforts anymore because they know it's a long-term effort, and they're looking for quick, couple-year projects and done and move on, and it's not going to be the same. So we do focusing more on our own state wildlife areas because we've got thousands of acres of state wildlife areas and just not enough people to even maintain those. So. But we do looking for all sorts of invasives out there. Again, a lot of our also we're looking at habitat manipulations for, say, grassland restoration, or we're doing brush control for early successional habitat. So in those cases, we use a lot of products with triclopyr and broadleaf control to keep the grasses going well on that. What else do I want to say? Oh, I sent Lindsay a link on this. I think she will post this later on our state DEP wildlife website. There's a link for habitat management for wildlife, and within that as well, I posted a particular brochure on Phragmites. It's a 3-pager on Phragmites control and ecology, and largely talk about much of the stuff I've talked about here today. So that'll be available to you. And that's my contact information. And I believe that's all I've got to say at the moment. So
Thank you, Roger.
well,
A lot of good material there. Thank you very much. And I like your emphasis, which we've heard several times today, about the need for perpetual maintenance, or at least long-term maintenance. I also like how you and several others have said that the native plants do return, and the rare plants after Phragmites control. So that's important. So thank you. We have like 3 minutes left. There's some questions in the chat. Can you see the chat from where you are, Roger?
yeah, here we go.
We have about 3 minutes.
Okay, where do we want to start? Which is there rhizome depth which imazapyr can't affect? And again, when you're spraying any product, you're not targeting the rhizomes, you're spraying the above ground plant. So if it'll get on the plant, you can use an appropriate surfactant and everything, and so it can adhere to the plant long enough to have an effective dose. Yeah, it'll kill it. It'll get sucked down into the root system. I know, particularly in sandy situations, those rhizomes can run very deep, even in organic situations. That it may need several successive applications to really knock it out, because there's such a starch reserve down in those rhizomes. So, but I'm not aware of any depth at which it will not take effect. What else here? I don't know, anything else specific for me? I see a lot of questions that came up from the last talk.
Yeah, I think that might be it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Roger, thank you very much. Great Greatly
most welcome.
appreciate your help.
My pleasure.
Our next speaker is Samantha Tank. Samantha is a program specialist for the Great Lake Commission's Aquatic Invasive Species Program. Samantha coordinates the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative and Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework. Samantha works with agencies, researchers, and land managers across the Great Lakes region to facilitate effective and efficient Phragmites management. Please welcome Samantha. All right, I can see your slide, Samantha.
Okay, now can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see your slide right there.
Okay, can you see the full slide
The
or?
full slide, yeah. You're one of
Oh,
the first
wow,
to
we're
come
doing
in
really well.
all the way like that.
Sorry, it took me a minute. We don't use Zoom a lot, and so it's just, I know it's like the preferred platform, but for whatever reason, I struggle with it.
Zoom is quirky. It doesn't
It
always
is.
do what
They're
you
all
expect it to do. Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to connect with all of you. This is a group that I haven't had the opportunity to connect with before. So my name is Sam Tank, and I work to coordinate the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative, which I'm going to talk to you about today. So we've already had a lot of really great guest speakers that have described the impacts of Phragmites, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but you can see from these two images that I have up on the screen, and these are both from Ontario, I'll mention, that Phragmites is a aggressive wetland invader. It's not uncommon for us to see stands that can grow 4+ meters tall, like you see in these pictures. I've been in some stands where there's so much old standing biomass that with the new growth, you go inside on a sunny day and it's practically dark inside. And this isn't a new issue to the area either. So Phragmites arrived to the East Coast in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And it's likely it was incidentally brought over initially as ship ballast material, but I would suspect many points of secondary introduction of this invasive species. But as you can see from this map, which, oh, sorry. Oh, okay, I thought I heard someone talking. If you had seen Dr. Blassi's presentation, his first presentation, you know that this map by Saltonstall et al. Is a little oversimplified, but you get kind of the idea that Phragmites isn't just this isolated issue here in, well, I guess I'm in Michigan, but where you are in New York, where I suspect most of you are, I'm on the East Coast. It's not just an issue here, but it's an issue that spans multiple countries and most of our states within the United States. And when I think about the impacts of non-native Phragmites, I tend to think about it in 3 different ways. So the impacts that it has on water, on our wildlife species, and then impacts that it has on people, on our way of life. So we know that these dense stands can clog drainage ditches, fill in ponds, even reduce water levels on some occasions. Phragmites is known, and when I say Phragmites, I'm just talking about the invasive haplotype. It's known to impact multiple wildlife species, such as migratory nesting birds, or support fewer insect species for aerial foragers. And it can really impede wetland species as well, such as you can see there's a poor little turtle in one of these pictures that we came across, and it just takes away habitat, or is difficult to navigate through, not just for us, but for wildlife as well. But then thinking about how Phragmites impacts us, there's lots of ways that it can be someone I think put in the comment that it can be a great fire starter, which, yeah, that's true. If you don't want the fire, that can be a problem. You can see This is a fire that happened near a neighborhood. So that's a concern if you do live next to a large dense patch that has lots of fuel. There's also a lot of issues with right-of-ways, and we did hear about some roadside management earlier, but Phragmites can block sight lines. It can grow over safety equipment, such as this fire hydrant. So lots of impacts. And we've known about these for some time. And that's where this idea for the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative came from. So in 2012, partners from the Great Lakes Commission and USGS came together to form this collaborative effort. And the collaborative was formed to advance Phragmites control throughout the Great Lakes. And it's funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And so that's kind of why it's focused on the Great Lakes area. And the collaborative is still today being administered through the Great Lakes Commission, where I'm from, and then our partner agency at the U.S. Geological Survey. And our mission at the collaborative is to facilitate communication amongst stakeholders and serve as this resource center for all things Phragmites biology, management, and research. And the resources that we have, while they're applicable across all 8 Great Lakes states and then Ontario and Quebec, which also have Great Lakes rights, the resources have a lot of utility beyond those areas and across North America as well. So just to give you an idea of what the structure of the collaborative looks like. So we have our core team, like I mentioned, and we provide administrative support, but then there's also the advisory committee. And the advisory committee is meant to represent a binational cross-section of Phragmites experts. You can see all of the agencies that I have listed who are represented currently in our advisory committee. And I will just give a shout out to Dr. Black. He's been on the advisory committee for some time. And so the advisory committee provides guidance and leadership to the collaborative as we work to further our mission. And they do this by having biannual meetings at which members share updates about relevant Phragmites work that's happening within their agency and within their region, and then help us to identify research and management gaps for the group to make progress on. But it's not just the core team and then the advisory committee who makes up the collaborative. The biggest part of the collaborative is the Phragmites community. So anyone who is impacted or impacted by non-native Phragmites or trying to impact non-native Phragmites, we would consider them part of our collaborative effort and our collaborative community. And so that includes everyone who's listening to my presentation right now. And the collaborative uses this approach called collective impact. And I just wanted to walk us through a little bit of what that means. If you want to know more about how we utilize the collective impacts, this is going to be a very superficial overview. In 2016, there was a paper published by the core team that I'm happy to send out, and it just looks at utilizing collective impact within the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. But there's 5 conditions of collective impact that I have listed on the screen. There's a neutral backbone organization, and that's the Great Lakes Commission. And that agency anchors the work of the group and provides long-term administrative support. So we're meant to be this, I kind of like to think of it as we're the executive assistant to the collaborative, where we collate all of the information, bring everyone together, and then help lead all of the initiatives that the advisory committee and our collaborative community bring forth. And then beyond that, the collaborative maintains lines of continuous communication, and that's one of the conditions of collective impact. And I'll talk about a few ways in how we do that in a moment. Then the focus of the rest of my presentation is actually going to be on our common agenda. And so for the past 4 years, the advisory committee, with the support of the core team, has been developing the common agenda, which is really this shared path forward with defined goals and objectives that help guide the collaborative or whatever collective impact approach that you're applying this to. We're currently working on establishing a system of shared measurements. We've done this over the past year and a half, I'd say, to try to make progress on the member strategies that we've outlined in the common agenda. And then finally, we're working to promote mutually reinforcing activities. And we do that through our member strategies as well. And when you implement this collective impact approach correctly, what you get is a strategic way forward that you can get from all of these root causes. So what if we think about what are the root causes of Phragmites management research? There's funding gaps, technology gaps, there's inefficiencies, there's uncertainties about best management practices, communication barriers. So all of these things are kind of where we're at now, what we're dealing with at the moment. And this collective impact approach gives us a way to figure out how we can make progress and see system changes so that we can eventually see a region that is not degraded by non-native Phragmites. So like I said, the common agenda was this first big step that we took to align our goals. The purpose of the common agenda is to clearly define the intentions for the collaborative and develop a shared understanding of gaps and problem areas surrounding Phragmites, and then highlight the areas and strategies that we're currently working on or that we wish to work on in the near future. So again, while I assume most of you are tuning in somewhere from the East Coast, we know that Phragmites isn't just a problem in New York or in the Eastern United States. And so we shouldn't be thinking about it as this isolated issue. And we also shouldn't be managing or researching it in this vacuum. And so the common agenda really gives us a way to strategically look at the broader issue of non-native Phragmites across the region, and then gives us steps that we can take to most effectively manage this problem together. We just released the common agenda this past November, so I'm excited to share it with you today. It is published on our website, and I'll give you that link soon. So this is what it looks like. The common agenda is broken up into 4 focus areas. And so there's regional coordination and collaboration, best management and restoration planning, advancement of research and technology, and then funding for Phragmites management. And then each of the focus areas has 3 or 4 member strategies. And that's what I'm going to kind of hone in on. So I'll just be looking at each of, or a handful of the member strategies in turn, and just giving you ideas on how you can get involved and be a part of this collective impact effort that we have going at the collaborative. So 2 that are pretty related are maintain a forum and network that is routinely used for sharing, discussing, and accessing new and best available information. And then provide a forum for researchers to collaborate and communicate with managers. And so the key to these 2, even though they have slightly different focuses, is bringing people together to communicate and share information and understand what's going on across their region. And you're all doing this right now. So just a big thank you to the Long Island Prism, because hosting an event like this and bringing managers and researchers and agency folks all together, this is one great way that we're working towards this collective effort of managing non-native Phragmites. Some of the things that we're doing at the collaborative is we host a website, and sometimes people think of us as just a website. And it's true that is kind of where all of our information exists, but this is what it looks like. And here's the address at the bottom of the screen, but there's everything from how to identify non-native Phragmites. And I did see even someone popped in the link in one of the earlier presentations to one of our blog posts too on how to differentiate between native and non-native Phragmites. So we have those resources, we have mapping resources, we have contact information for different SISMAs and prisms across the region. So everything that you would need to identify, to start learning about management, to get in contact with other managers and researchers, it's all kind of housed on our website. And then we also have a listserv, which it's hosted by a Google group, and we have nearly 800 members right now. And this is a way for us to be able to ask questions to other managers, researchers, novices, everyone who's dealing with Phragmites across the region. And you can just add yourself to this group and then pose questions to this community. So this is a really nice resource as well. We also have a webinar series, and this is one of the ways that we try to connect researchers to managers, because there is a lot of really great research happening out there that it's hard to, beyond publishing white papers, you don't really get those out to the public. So this is a good way that we can figure out what's going on and what's the latest research other than events like this that also provide that opportunity. And I do want to highlight that we do have an upcoming webinar series that's starting. It is going to be featuring students from not just across the Great Lakes, but across the all of North America. Really, we have folks from Utah, Ontario, all over, and they're going to be presenting on their research starting in March. And I think we have speakers lined up at least through August, where there will be 1 or 2 presentations a month. So you can find that information on the internet. But we also do send out the latest research that's being published as well for a research roundup. So you can subscribe to this or find an archive of all Phragmites research that at least we've been able to find that's relevant to the region, or at least to the North America, on the website as well. Another member strategy that I wanted to highlight is encourage consistent use of online map tools and regional distribution to inform early detection and rapid response efforts. So there might be a lot of us out there that want to do something but don't really know how to get involved. And we might have a lot of Phragmites in our area. And one thing that you can do is you can utilize some of these really great mapping tools that are available to us that utilizes participatory or citizen science, where you can go on and with just some minor self-training, mark areas that have invasive Phragmites or other invaders if you're interested as well. So these are just some of them that are available. There's others. I do have links for those if anyone is interested in checking any of them out. Another member strategy is to consolidate and share case studies, success stories, and existing best management guidance. So this is really one of the things that I think we struggle with most as managers and researchers is we have all of these great tools and techniques, but there's just not a great way to share them out. And so we're trying to do a better job of that. So if you have a really successful management strategy or technique, we'd really love to highlight you. So we do have a running list of case studies that we're always trying to add to, and they're kind of from all different levels. So from designing an effective Phragmites management strategy all the way to the implementation of an effective Phragmites strategy, everything in between. So that's all here. So if you want to check that out, you might be able to find something relevant to your area, or if you have something to contribute, that would be great as well. Identify obstacles and capacity gaps related to implementing best practices. This is another member strategy. And this one, I wanted to bring up, although there's not a really great way right now for us to tackle this. So myself, I don't actively go out and manage Phragmites, but I do my best to facilitate conversations and consolidate resources and help managers any way that I can at my role in the collaborative. And a lot of this is trying to figure out, where are those gaps? Where are gaps related to figuring out what works best? And you can help us by emailing us at phragmites@glc.org, and together we can create a running list of what are these capacity gaps, what are these implementation barriers that we have, and we can continue to look into them. But it's hard to figure those out without being an on-the-ground manager. And the last one I want to talk about is implementing the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework. And the goal of this is really to improve our understanding of the effectiveness of different management strategies. And so HAMF is probably how I'll refer to it the rest of the time, is a program that was created back in 2016, 2017 under the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. And it has a similar core team, but it also includes the contributions of the University of Georgia as well. I just wanted to start off with a little bit of background on why the program was created. So actually, Roger, thanks, just shout out to you. You set me up really well for this. He went over some really great management techniques, but one thing that they all have in common is that they're really resource intensive and they have variable effectiveness. So something that might be working really well here in Michigan might have completely different outcomes over in New York. And this could be, you know, just because of timing, it could be of implementation techniques. There's just a lot of uncertainty surrounding management right now. And like I said before, one of our biggest issues that we have, I guess, is that we don't have a way to share information right now. There's not really this great mechanism, or, you know, like I'm trying to think, like, if we had like a Phragmites specific social media page where managers could go on and just, you know, tweet about or share videos about all of their successes. We do have a Twitter page if you want to find us on that, but I'm just thinking there's not really a great way for us to do that right now. And so that was another problem that we were facing. And also, even when you have a bunch of Phragmites managers with decades of experience, they don't always agree on which techniques are going to be most effective. And that might not be because they don't know what they're talking about, but it's likely because they're facing a different series of conditions that we're just not recognizing. We asked ourselves, how can we do better? We wanted to figure out, how can we have a system scale approach that's going to reduce trial and error? So, you know, we went out one year, we sprayed with herbicide, you know, it was a glyphosate mixture, 2%, but wasn't really that effective. So this year we're going to add a surfactant, or this year we're going to switch to a imazapyr. That's really contingency planning. What we're really trying to do is learn and understand site-specific differences and understand how we can implement techniques in a way that's going to optimize their efficiency and effectiveness. And we're doing this through the implementation of a long-term adaptive management program. And this is just the program from a participant's perspective. So a participant would enroll a site into the program. They go out in July and conduct a series of standardized monitoring techniques. The monitoring is meant to be simple enough that you don't need an advanced degree in order to implement it, but robust enough that when we do get that information back and then it goes into our learning model, that our model has enough information to make predictions on what is going to be most effective and efficient at that site. And so the output of our model, which goes out every year in August, is management guidance that is a combination of that efficient and effective approach to Phragmites management. And then managers are responsible for managing, either following our guidance or not, and then reporting back to us what they did. And so at both the monitoring and management steps of the cycle, participants let us know in the form of the standardized reports that they submit to us. So then after monitoring or after management happens, the next July rolls around, monitoring occurs again, and then we have this before and after picture of what happened over the course of that management season or that cycle year at the site, and how effective were those different techniques that had been implemented. And then once again, the model learns from that and then can send out updated and improved guidance that's meant to increase its predictive power the more data we get. And so this happens on this iterative cycle. So while I'd like to say that we track every different management combination and different management technique out there, that would really slow down the learning process. It takes hundreds of data points to really learn anything about any one technique. So we've limited ourselves to 10 different management actions that are divided into 16 different management combinations. So I won't go over these in detail, but if you've managed Frag before, you've likely implemented at least one of these combinations. And even if you haven't managed Frag, you've definitely rested, which is do nothing to the site. So these are all of the combinations that PAMF is designed to learn from. We did release our strategic plan for the PAMF program recently, back in November as well. So if you're interested to learn more about the goals of the program or some of the things that we're tracking over time, this is available on the website. And one thing I did want to point out is who can participate. So anyone in the Great Lakes Basin or surrounding watershed can participate in PAMF. That I know that does exclude some people on this call right now. And the reason we limit participation to the Great Lakes region, sorry, my unhelpful coworker is coming by, is because of the model that I don't really have time to go into in a lot of detail, but essentially one of our assumptions for the model is that there's no difference in control methods depending on the location where you are in the basin. And even though this is likely already violated sometimes as an assumption, it really just doesn't hold up when we start getting into different climates and when we start getting into brackish or saltwater, different geological features. So if we get too far outside of the basin, then the models has too many variables to consider and our learning really isn't as effective. But our current reach for the program, we are in all 8 Great Lakes states and Ontario. We have 220 management units that have been enrolled since the inception of the program in 2017, and those have been enrolled by 71 managers. And I will say eventually, one of the goals is to put out a best management practice kind of summary document that gives information on what those effective techniques are and those efficient techniques are. And that should be applicable more widely as well. So if you are in the area and interested in getting involved, I did want to mention that we will be hosting a live training sometime, probably in May. And we do have a training course that we're utilizing a Moodle platform, and that should be up in just about a couple of months. But you can email us at pamf@glc.org or that phragmites@glc.org if you'd like more information on how to get involved. But really just want to finish up with highlighting once again the common agenda. I'd encourage everyone to go on the website and check it out. This is, I think, the best approach that we have forward for trying to figure out how can we strategically make progress And I do want to mention that you don't have to go through the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative or work through us to work on some of these member strategies. These are just guiding approaches that if you're thinking about how your agency or how you as an individual, how you can make progress managing or researching non-native Phragmites, these are great starting places. And that's all I have. So my contact information is on the screen. So you can email me at sam@glc.org, or the Phragmites one works too, that goes to me as well. So thanks again. And I think I have a minute or two for any questions.
You do. Thank you, Samantha. And I just want to say it's an amazing program you have there.
It's a huge collaborative effort. So I'm just the messenger.
You sell yourself short. You're a great messenger. You have a lot there that the prisms in New York could learn from, because we face some of the same issues, and the way you've laid out the collective impact approach and the PAMF and all that, it's pretty cool. And it could be used beyond Phragmites to other invasive species. It's good stuff. Thank you. Yeah, we do have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yes, I'm just trying to look to see which ones are relevant. It looks like Lindsay asked, what is your system for keeping track of all of these land manager case studies over long stretches of time? That's a great question. We kind of struggle with this ourselves, and are thinking currently about how we can restructure it a little bit to follow up on some of the ones that have been documented, close to a decade ago now. I think what we kind of have an archive of these. They do take a long time to document, but we are in the process of developing a standardized form that can be easily filled out and updated. It's just going to be a set of questions that different managers can fill out on their own and submit to us. And then we'll just have to follow up on them. But we don't have a great process in place right now, because what we found is that it was quite time intensive to continue to document these case studies. And we needed a bit more of an efficient way to do so.
Let us know if you find one, because we're looking too. We're finding that over 10, 15, 20 years or more of invasive species work, as organizations change, as staff changes, as people retire, there's a lot of knowledge that gets lost. And it would be great if we can document more of what we do.
Yeah, I completely agree that knowledge transfer and the lack thereof is, I think, a big challenge in a lot of organizations. So I will let you know if we have any breakthroughs.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samantha. Greatly appreciated. Let's go on to our next presenter, Peter Militi. Peter has a background in horticulture and botany and has worked in botanic gardens for 12 years. That's 6 years at the New York Botanic Gardens and 6 years at the National Botanic Gardens in Dublin. Peter is now freelancing, working mainly on Long Island and in New York City. Invasive plant management is increasingly becoming part of his work. Please welcome Peter Militi. Peter. There we go. I can see your slide. I can't hear you. It's no audio. I think
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah.
You. Okay, good. All right.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Okay, so I am happy to be here today speaking on behalf of the people that live around Marion Lake. It has been their dedication, tenacity, and hard work that has achieved success in the battle against one of the most difficult to control plants, invasive plants of this region, which is, of course, Phragmites australis.
Hey, Peter,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Can you hit the slideshow view to make it full?
Slideshow, where the heck?
Or, yeah, which one is it?
Where's that? Let me see. Just give me a minute. I've never done this
We can
before.
see the slides, but they're, it's not the
If you
full
go up
view.
to the, if you go up to the top bar and click slideshow,
I don't see slideshow.
Oh, it might be under
higher than where
yours.
you are.
It might be under his Peter's Zoom window thing. That thing gets in the way.
Slideshow.
To the left. Yep, you're near it to the right.
Okay,
then-
there's something in the way here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Mhm.
All right.
Can we drag that Zoom window out of the way, Lindsay? So I think there's a way to
You
drag
can,
it or
yes.
something.
You can also hit, there's a button at the bottom. It's right next to the plus and minus all the way at the bottom right.
Yeah.
That first little icon to the left of that plus and minus,
Mm-hmm.
to the left.
Up to the left. Sorry.
Yes, that first one.
This
That
one?
one. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
that should do it. Let's see.
That did it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay.
All right. But now I can't see my slides to move downwards. Okay. Okay, I'll ask you. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go. Sorry about that, everybody.
Okay.
Okay, I shall begin again. Okay, well, this is a story of how Marion Lake is being transformed from a Phragmites choked lake into what it is becoming, a thriving and diverse freshwater ecosystem. It's also an honor, of course, to be addressing geez, sorry, I don't do the things anyway. Now, Marion Lake is a freshwater lake of approximately 18 acres situated on the North Fork of Long Island. Here is a pretty poor quality satellite map, sorry about that. It's located on Bay Avenue in the town of Southold, Suffolk County, south of Route 25A. It's surrounded by residential development, a community cemetery, and town-owned land. The wetlands in question extend along the riparian fringe of the lake and cover about 5 acres, varying from narrow margins to extensive swampy areas. It's the wrong one. I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry, I can't. Oh, here we go. Sorry, give me a minute here. It's the first time I've done this. I'm having a bit of a problem. Oh, yeah. So here you can see in this diagrammatic map, you can see the wetland areas highlighted in green here. Most of wetland buffer lies within the boundaries of the town parcel owned land. That includes most of the lake. Smaller parts of the wetland are owned by the adjoining property, private property owners. Marion Lake is a natural lake. The primary source of water comes from fresh groundwater and from overland runoff. There is an input of brackish water sometimes from occasional storm overwash of the barrier beach between the lake and Orient Bay. The outlet of the lake is through a small culvert designed to drain the lake into the adjacent bay. The lake is in 2 sections, as you can see here, connected by a 20-foot channel which runs under Bay Avenue in the center of the map there. The depth of the lake varies very little from year to year and from season to season. The lake and wetlands provide habitat for numerous species of fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. This narrative goes back to 2006, when it was first decided to do something about the Phragmites problem. Active management of the Phragmites began in 2008, and I took over management of the Phragmites in 2015. By 2005, the wetlands were overrun by Phragmites. This picture here, oh, the wrong one again. Oh, this picture here was a typical view of the lake shore from that period, 100% Phragmites. And here is the bridge over Bay Avenue, clogged with Phragmites, preventing the flow of water between the 2 lake sections. The Phragmites had encroached on the shoreline in certain areas of 70 feet deep, and the 5 acres of wetland basically along the lake fringes were 100% Phragmites. This was a fire hazard, a vector problem, and caused a loss of wildlife habitat. stands were up to 15 feet tall, as we can see here from the early cutting pictures. And according to some of the long-term local residents, there had been quite a reduction in the numbers of visiting birds. Fishing was practically impossible, and basically you couldn't even see the lake from the land. So in that same year, a local resident named Listserv made that over the past several years, the lake had virtually disappeared, decided to act. She formed a committee of residents, and they started researching into this aggressive giant weed that was choking their beautiful lake. They contacted many organizations and universities that specialize in the control and eradication of invasive plants, and slowly but surely they learned what had to be done. A petition was drawn and passed around the locals to raise funds and to start the eradication process. Funding and permit processing wasn't easy. It took quite a few years to raise enough funds to get going. Money was raised by door-to-door collection, garage sales, small boat races, car washes, and the like. And they also applied to the DEC for funding and for a wetland disturbance permit. It took 2 years to get the permit. The committee's applications were turned down 3 times. In the end, they turned to a wetland specialist who applied for the permit and was successful. The permit was granted in 2007, and the following year, they were awarded a matching grant of over $100,000 from the state for restoration of the lake. At last, work could proceed. Wetland specialists were contracted, and a plan was made on how to begin controlling the Phragmites, which is basically numerous cuts and herbicide application. Not very complicated, but very tough work. So the first cut happened in 2008 by the Wetland Company. Local volunteers helped clean up the cuttings to defray the costs. The Wetland Company had a crew of 8 cutters and worked for 10 days to fill 21 30-yard dumpsters, which were then transported for incineration. It was a mammoth task indeed, and anybody that has ever been inside a 30-yard dumpster will appreciate just how big they are. And here's a picture of some of the guys dancing on the Phragmites in one of those dumpsters so they can fit as much material in it as possible. A lot of stuff. Cutting was accomplished by foot on the shoreline where possible. Here's one of the larger wetland areas. Guys just clear cutting what was 100% Phragmites. And by floating platforms or small boats on the water side. The frags were cut to ground level or close to, and the frags that were growing in the water were cut back to water level. The connections between the 2 segments of the lake around the bridge was completely clogged with dense mats of Phragmites, preventing the flow of water between these areas. So you can see on either side of the bridge there, the Phragmites looking as if they're about to jump out of the water onto the road, clogging the flow of water between the 2 sections. So this area would have to be dredged to restore the flow. The committee contacted the town of Southhold and persuaded them to dredge this area. This was achieved by using a large backhoe with a very long arm. You can see the backhoe here with a big clump of Phragmites in its bucket, roots and all. And yeah, it took a lot of material out, and this is how it looked after the dredging. Once again, there was a free-flowing connection of water between the 2 sections of the lake. The next cut was made in the spring of 2009. 7 30-yard dumpsters were filled and taken away for incineration. Then in 2010, in June of 2010, another cut for 5 30-yard dumpsters were filled. So the Phragmites were thinning, and it was reported that there were signs of some native vegetation returning. Unfortunately, I don't know what species were returning, as no records were made at this time. Then in October, same year, October 2010, an aquatic herbicide applicator was hired to apply the herbicide rodeo by hand wicking and localized spraying. After a permit was granted by the DEC, of course. The spraying was very effective. The plants were wilting within 24 hours. But unfortunately, this was the only time that there was herbicide applied to Phragmites. there were objections from some of the residents about the herbicide applications, and no further applications were permitted. So on to habitat restoration and planting. In June of 2012, 2,000 plugs of 7 different species of plants were planted in the wetland areas around the lake. They were planted in groups of 50 to 70 plants from a DEC recommended list. There were 7 species, 5 herbaceous species, which were Hibiscus moschutus, swamp mallows, Phonoplectus tabernaemontana, soft stem bulrush, type angustifolia, narrowleaf cattail, Juncus effusus, soft rush, and our versicolor blue flag. And the shrubby species were Bacchus amelifolia, groundsel, and Myrica pennsylvanica, northern bayberry. 24 pounds of wetland plant seed were spread around the site at this time too. 2 different mixes were used, one suitable for drier areas and one for the wetter spots. Unfortunately, there's no record of what the seed mixture consisted of. I couldn't trace it. Then 4 months later, it was October in 2012, and disaster struck in the form of Hurricane Sandy. The sea breached the land bridge at Rabbit Lane, this is Rabbit Lane where the houses are, which is the land bridge between the sea and the lake. And in came the sea, and tons of debris were deposited on and around the lake. So we reckon many, if not the majority, of the newly planted plugs were lost. Here's another picture of the debris, an absolute disaster. So you can imagine the effect that that had on the little plugs that had been planted. However, when the water receded, a major cleanup was carried out by the local volunteers. And you can see the flat area here where the Phragmites had been cut. This would have been where the seed and plugs had been planted, which probably no longer existed. So going forward in 2013, there was another cut. However, it was becoming prohibitively expensive to employ the wetland company. The initial cut had cost $12,000 and the second was $10,000. The cost was diminishing each year with each cut, but the money was running out despite the ongoing donations from the locals every year. So they decided that the next cutting would be carried out by volunteers under the direction of one of the wetland specialists. And then the following year it was decided to further defray costs to hire a local landscaper and crew to carry out the cutting. Instruction was given to cut the frags only, however, they just clear cut, putting down all the natives that had been carefully planted and that had survived Sandy. This is when I was contacted. At that time, I lived in the area and was known to some of the lake people. I began cutting in 2015 and have continued to do so every year since then. I usually cut twice a year, in June or July, and again in October, using a crew of 3 to 4 guys. And now we've got to the stage where one 30-yard dumpster is sufficient to take away all of the cut Phragmites. One 30-yard dumpster that's fairly compacted. Here's some pictures of the guys cutting. You can see the Phragmites there, but you can also see hibiscus, and there are other natives in there growing. There's some typha visible as well. So the hibiscus or the Phragmites are thinning, and some of the native plants are beginning to thrive and compete with the Phragmites. Here's a guy cutting from the water side. And you can see some Phragmites here and some hibiscus, and there's Bacchus and Myrica in the background there. So we're making progress. It's very tough, very hard work. Sometimes we have to fill one of the boats with the cut Phragmites and roll that to the bridge, then put the stuff on a truck and then bring it to the dumpster, because in some areas there's no access by road. There's a handsome man in the boat there covered in Phragmites, and there's another guy manhandling the stuff out. Of course, there's no machinery can be brought in the marshy areas, so it's all by hand, all very hard work. There's 3 of the guys, 3 of the cutters, great workers. And I'm glad that I know them, because if I didn't and I bumped into them armed like that, I think I would turn around and run away. But they're great guys and working very hard, as you can imagine, the amount of material they have to cut and remove. Over the past 6 years, I've noticed a definite increase in the density of the frags every year. Decrease, yes. However, if a year is missed, as one was, due to a delay in renewing the DEC permit, the frags increase at an alarming rate. So the key is to make sure to cut every year twice as possible. Slowly but surely, the frags are being replaced by natives. It's likely that some of these plants are plugs and others are from seed blown in, and some are from the seed bank. Here's a picture of one of the drier areas, and you can see Solidago and Baccharis, and there's some, it's not a pretty grainy picture, but and there is one of the veterans of cutting for the past 5 years, Mr. Paul Harwood. He's a great native plants man, and he helps identify a lot of the species. And he also holds the rather dubious record of falling into the lake most times in one day, which was 3 times, I believe. Though covered in mud and rather smelly, he continued working for the day. Good for him. So dense stands of Typha and Dicotum verticulatus are beginning to grow around the fringes of the lake, on the water, between the water and the land. You can see Typha here. You can see there's a lot of sedges and rushes, and yeah, the Phragmites. This was just 100% Phragmites not so long ago. Here's Dicotum verticulata, which is a great native plant for stabilizing the edge of the lake. And in the center of it, I think that is Machia terrestris swamp candles, which is a recent arrival. Also, we have lots of Asclepias tuberosa, and we have lots of sedges and rushes. This is, I think, Shonoplectus montana, and we have big stands of Juncus effusus stands, several Carex species. This, I think, is Carex flava. And in 2019, we spotted Lobelis syphilitica, an unfortunate name, but I think it was used to treat venereal diseases back in the day. So it's very exciting to see new species coming in each year. There are also clumps of Benson fern, lady fern, and eastern marsh fern. Further back, woodies dominate, such as Myrica, Baccharis, and Salix discolor. Well, there's Myrica somewhere in the background here, but you can see Asclepias and Typha, and the Phragmites are thinning quite fast. Here is another picture of the edge of the lake. That was 100% Phragmites not so long ago. Lots of Typha, hibiscus, and Dicotum in there. And here we can see Salix discolor to the right, more hibiscus, Typha, and other shrubby stuff in the background. But we are making progress. We haven't made a checklist of all the plants that are arriving and plants that exist at the moment, but we plan to do so. It's great to see new species appearing every year. The decline of the Phragmites has also allowed space for non-natives to colonize. Frequency of the invasive Littorum solarica purple induced life has increased. You can see it poking its head up here. But amongst the Typha and Dicotum and Machia are actually in the same family, which is interesting. No other invasives have yet been spotted in the wetland areas. And due to its adaptability and versatility, the Phragmites grow in all the locations around the lake, in the wetter areas, in the drier areas, in the shady areas, and in the sunny areas. And it does reappear every year, but it is diminishing in size and numbers. With ongoing cutting each year, we hope to diminish even further, but I think it's going to be ongoing forever. Here we are. A couple of years back, this was an area that we missed 1 year, so you can see the Phragmites come back in force. But again, there's some Typha there and hibiscus. So I think once we keep cutting them, we will be able to make a lot of progress. I'd love to apply herbicides to frags this year, but for now I'm not permitted. It would save a lot of time, expense, and labor in the long run. So in conclusion, the cutting regime is working a bit slowly. The ecological function of this once degraded habitat has been restored to a large extent. The lake has been transformed from monoculture of frags into a very diverse natural native habitat that supports a wide array of plant and animal species. So it's basically two cuttings a year, and I think the competition from the natives as they establish helps reduce the numbers of the Phragmites as well. So it is a success story, but we need to remain vigilant and we need to monitor and cut every year for the foreseeable future, as I said. None of this would have been achieved if it hadn't been for the local lady, Laurie Usher. It was her patience, persistence, dedication, and love of the lake that got us to where we are now. Of course, there were a lot of other people involved too, way too many to mention. But it took several years of planning, design, obtaining permits, and applying for grant funding and private funding. To date, the total spent has been about $750,000. The committee was awarded less than a quarter of this from the state, and the rest was raised by residents who continue to support the project. So here's a nice twilight picture of a group of snowy egrets who roost on the lake during the summer months. But of course, you can see Phragmites poking its head up in the corner just to remind us that the management must continue, as I said, for the foreseeable future. So the bottom line is it can be done. This most difficult and entrenched invasive plant can be tamed and controlled to a good extent, but it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of money. So that's about it, folks.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's amazing what you've all been able to do there, and that you're able to pull together a group of people willing to do that every year. But you've brought back some nice native plants, so it looks great. It really does. Hopefully, maybe herbicides someday. Do you think the attitude will ever change in the community?
I don't know. According to Laurie, she says she doesn't think it's going to change, but maybe with maybe if we can show them some of the previous presentations, they might change their mind. I hope so.
All right.
Yeah.
We have a few questions. We have about 4 minutes left.
Where do I go for the questions?
Can you see the chat? If you see a button down there somewhere for chat.
Shoot, I don't see the darn chat thing.
I can ask you the questions. Let's
Okay.
see. Which 2 months do you do the cutting?
We usually do one earlier in the year in June or July, and then one in October or November. Some years we only get cut once, which then we choose November or October.
Do you think that crushing stems early in the summer and breaking them instead of cutting would be just as effective?
I'm sure it would. Well, I guess if the vascular system was destroyed in the process of doing that, it probably would. Yeah, it would probably save a lot of time too. It's something I've never thought of.
Although thatch might be a problem.
Yeah, it would. But I think the Phragmites have declined to such an extent at the moment that thatch wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't interfere too much, I think, with the natives.
All right.
It's thatching very well.
And there's a good comment here from Bruce. It may be useful to think about cutting as a tool for managing more than controlling Phragmites. And in this context, removing the cut material can contribute significantly to the removal of excess nitrogen and other nutrients from the water. That's a great point, Bruce.
Absolutely, yes.
Over several years, this may be a significant remediation tool. Yeah, so get all that organic material out of there. That's a good idea.
Yeah, because there are cyanobacterial algal blooms every year. Like it's quite a eutrophic lake, yes, during the summer months.
Peter, how do you dispose of the dumpster loads of cut Phragmites?
There is an incinerator in somewhere in Central Ireland that they are brought to, and they are incinerated there. So they go up in smoke.
All right. And you might not know this one yet. If you were going to apply herbicide, would it be during both cutting or only during the second cutting? Both cuttings are only during the second cutting. Have you thought about applying herbicide and when you would do it?
You know, I think it's most effective during the second cutting, like later in the year when they are translocating. So I believe. So I think that's when we would do it.
All right, I think that's it on the questions. Peter, thank you very much. It's a great project. I love seeing native plants coming back in. I always enjoy the photos of the natives coming back.
Great. Okay.
Thank you very
so
much.
much, Phil.
All right, Peter, take care. Thank you.
Bye, cheerio.
I see one more. I see one more question, but I don't see a question. But that's okay. If you have questions, just email us and we'll try to find out the answer from Peter. We're going to take a 10-minute break and meet back at 3:10. We have 3 great presentations after the break that you don't want to miss, including a cautionary tale. So you don't want to miss any one of those presentations. We'll see you back at 3:10. Welcome back. Our next speaker, Ray Hinkle, has been a practicing ecologist for more than 45 years, both conducting and managing aquatic, wetland, and terrestrial ecology studies in a wide variety of habitats. These include coastal and freshwater wetlands, riverine and lacustrine systems, and a diversity of uplands. These studies have been collected to support a wide variety of proposed projects, including environmental remediation projects, commercial developments, power generation facilities, pipelines, and electric transmission systems. For the past 25 years, Ray has focused on restoration of wetlands dominated by invasive type M Phragmites and has assessed numerous approaches to restoring these areas to diverse natural marshes. Please welcome Ray Hinkle. We are bringing up Ray.
Okay, now do I have audio now?
You do, yes.
Okay, next would be, do I have
I
slideshow?
I see it, yes.
Okay. And
Perfect.
I have full screen?
You are full screen, Ray.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right,
Your-
thank you very
your
much for the
audio's-
introduction.
Your audio, Ray,
and,
your audio's a little shaky, just so you know.
How about now?
Be close
Anything
to the
happen?
mic or something. It's probably the connectivity, but
Yeah, anything happen better here?
that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold a little speaker here. I'm on a headset. So, well, thank you for the introduction. You know, I am currently working with AKRF, you know, based in New York City. I'm over here in New Jersey, but I relate to folks down in Hanover, Maryland. So you might see a few references to who I am and where I am, but I do sit over here in northern New Jersey, and I want to acknowledge Ken Strait as well, as he's the director of the biological programs at PSEG. All of what I'll speak to today relates to the PSEG estuary enhancement program, which I'll describe in a little detail as well. So I'll also focus on a particular site called Alloway Creek, which is one of the restoration sites that's a component of the estuary enhancement program, which is associated with the permits that have been issued for the Salem generating station. It's a nuclear station down on Delaware Bay, and it utilizes once-through cooling. And as permit conditions, for use of water, there was a permit requirement that they do a lot of restoration. I mentioned Alloway Creek. That's actually the mouth of Alloway Creek at the top of the slide. It's a tributary that comes into the Delaware River in the upper bay there, just near the station itself. The permit that was issued by New Jersey DEP required restoration, enhancement, and preservation of 20,000 acres of coastal marsh and uplands along Delaware Bay. And the objective of that was to increase the export of detrital production from tidal marshes to support the Delaware estuary fisheries food chain. So it has that objective of producing more fish as an offset for fishery losses due to entrainment and impingement at the station. And it includes restoration of tidal flows to diked saute farms, which are in the lower bay, and the restoration of 5,000 acres of Phragmites dominated marshes at 4 locations in both New Jersey and Delaware that are in the upper bay, actually more appropriately probably on the river itself at that point. And it followed a lot of management plan advisory committee or MPAC and adaptive management team guidance through this whole process. The whole program started in around 1992, so it's been ongoing for a long time. There have been a lot of presentations on this project over the years. I'm going to kind of roll a lot of that into a very condensed format here, and I'll keep moving, so I hope I can get through it. As I mentioned, there are 2 types of restorations. The one was the restoration of tidal flows to 3 saute farms down those little greenish amoebas on the screen next to the arrow, very far down bay. And as Bernd mentioned, and I think was also commented earlier by Roger about salinity being controlling. These areas were diked, had very little exchange. This is a map of pre-restoration showing just a couple of linear drainage channels at the Marsh River Township site, which is one of those 3 down bay sites. And the intent then was to go in with dredges and long reach excavators and essentially open up channels into these areas that hadn't been flooded in decades or even centuries, as they had been used by local residents to produce saute farm as crop, and they needed to maintain essentially a high marsh to do that. The dredge material was used beneficially, popular term these days, to build high marsh islands within the area, so as not to totally lose high marsh as a habitat, because it's important for species like black rail and salt marsh sparrow and the like that are getting a lot of attention these days. So they were opened up, and you can see in this image, the first dredge channels are showing up here, and in the subsequent year of imaging, we fly these sites every year and update the channels and vegetative cover. And I'll just run through a couple of series of slides here that will show the build out through natural processes of the channels that resulted by opening up those systems. And a very natural system now inundating and draining those sites. And they've essentially been converted now to low marsh, fully functional systems. And the only place we see any Phragmites, as you see by the arrow, are on the very higher remnant dikes that are on the site, that are out of reach of that 18 to 20 parts per thousand lower bay water that is flooding the site on a daily basis. So very effective control of Phragmites simply by returning tidal flow to this area. The Phragmites sites are up bay. There are 4 sites that have been pursued for for a long period of time now. Alloway Creek and Comanche River in New Jersey, and the Rocks and Cedar Swamp, both are wildlife management areas over in Delaware. And they're shown, with the little red arrows there. As I say, I'll talk about mostly the Alloway Creek site, which is the farthest up bay, there by the little blue star. When it all started, the Phragmites, shown in sort of the beige color, covered about 60% of the 1,600 acres that was the focus restoration area for this this project. The green was the existing Spartina, alterniflora, and other diverse natural marsh area that existed at that time. Just a view, aerial view back in 96. And I'll be referencing Eagle Island a number of times through the talk here. It was a hunting camp that existed out on a little peninsula of upland. And you can see total Phragmites cover around the house. And there's an island out there that will show up in a number of pictures too. It's this one, if you can see my cursor moving around in the middle of it. Waterways, were choked and closing off, as we've probably all seen Phragmites can do. Oftentimes the combs would lay right across, and I think that's how the channels, get covered up over time. The herbicide treatment approaches utilized were primarily aerial treatment, helicopter treatment exclusively, and also ground treatment. Initially, we start off with small units, these Argos, which are in the middle of the picture. They're very good because they're very, very light, but they're very slow. We eventually moved to Marshmaster type units like the one on the right, MM1 and MM2. They're 2 different sizes that we've used. And we've also used boat treatments as well on creek banks. One of the variables is application rates. We started off using 10 gallons per acre of aerial treatment. And we eventually bumped that up to 20 gallons per acre. It's the same dose, 5.5 pints of the concentrate glyphosate per acre, but you just put more water on because you get it wetter, and that seems to have a more positive effect on the control. Glyphosate, we've been talking about it a lot of times today. It has some, I think, very positive features relative to alternatives. Most important, though, is the fact that it has a very short soil half-life, and it's got a low mobility potential because it binds to the sediment. And we've also found it to be the fact that desirable species like Spartina alterniflora and Scirpus and a lot of the other desirable plants are resistant to it. at least at the time you apply, which is, as we've discussed earlier today, during the fall season. We can spray right over top of Spartina alterniflora, and the next season it looks like it wasn't even touched, whereas dead, Phragmites combs will be standing around. The first year after treatment, we decided to do a burn to get the combs off the marsh plain, both to see the tributary systems that existed because they were hidden by the coverage, and we used a helitorch. It's basically a napalm dispensing system that drops globules of burning gasoline along a line that can be then set up, to burn off an area given wind directions and all. It can get pretty intense out there when you do this. Phragmites burns very vigorously and almost looks like an oil fire. It must have a lot of that kind of material in it that produces that heavy smoke, and you can kind of see the flame dripping out of the helitorch. If you're going to do this, you better have a lot of these guys around. Important to maintain fire control, and the state was fully cooperative with this operation and would never have happened without that. You also need to have these guys around, which is water carrying, drop planes and all to be ready for any control action you might need. This is just an image of an area that was treated, was then burned. And the one thing you'll note is that the burn didn't have much effect on it if it wasn't treated. And what you're seeing are gaps between flight lines when the helicopter flew that grew back. These were kind of a continuing problem in terms of getting complete coverage. We would get these stripes, as you might think of them. And again, kind of a year after burn view. And that little island that I talked about, Eagle Island, is this one here, the top of the image here. We had protected around it from any spray treatments. So you see the green ring, Phragmites ring around the island. Likewise, the areas on the bottom here were areas that were ground treated because there's a transmission line that runs across here that prohibited aerial treatment. And you can see it was kind of spotty. The first year we were using an Argo, we didn't get very good coverage. And if you don't hit it directly, you don't do anything to it. It doesn't spread. You can draw a line where you treat and where you don't. We were really encouraged the first year after the burn with the stubble, just standing of the Phragmites stems. We saw a lot of seedlings of Spartina alterniflora coming in, but we also saw, sparse Phragmites regrowth coming in, very short, very, stunted, and kind of brushy growth. It wasn't the typical single stem, but a very kind of stunted and aberrant type of growth, which is pretty typical of Phragmites that's been treated. But what happened is a couple of years after treatment, we saw regrowth on areas that had looked like they had been treated. You can also though see some of these stripes where these were misses during the herbicide or the aerial treatment. So we were looking at additional herbicide treatment, and that prompted integrated pest management investigations, because just more and more herbicide was not that acceptable to some of the stakeholders. So we agreed to enter into a test area program that looked at various types of controls and compared them to both the herbicide treatment and no treatment references. We had over 100 different test cells established where we looked at different approaches and combinations of approaches. And just to expand on that legend, not to go through all these, but yeah, you can get a sense of all the different combinations we tried, mowing and herbicide, microtopography, which I'll show a picture of, and herbicide, you know, just a lot of different combinations just to see if something was the silver bullet that would reduce the herbicide application and still be effective. You know, this shows you the layout of some of those test areas that were shown on the map. Again, this is Eagle Island. This is that little island that I've talked about a couple of times. And microtopography, I think there was a reference to this maybe previously about trying to just tear up the rhizome systems. The intent was maybe to get more saline water into the sediment to have an effect on the growth. So it was carved up with these different types of apparatus that would go down into the sediment and rip the rhizomes apart. And we did see some initial beneficial effect of that. I think it was maybe related to seed capture, really, you know, just by roughening up the surface and seeing a lot of desirable species come in. We also tried mowing, you know, multiple mows per year. And, you know, that didn't seem in the end to do a whole lot. As you see here in a series of pictures of one of the mowed areas where we were mowing this area multiple times per year. And, you know, started in 1999, 2002. It looked kind of like it did at the beginning of things when it was left to grow through that season. Also tried herbivory. You know, these goats were penned in a Phragmites area. They ate, you know, about everything else, but did not impart, you know, any control on the Phragmites that was you know, within the enclosure. And so in the end, when we got through all of the analysis, it basically turned out that out of all the combinations of treatments and individual treatments, no combination of treatments resulted in better control than herbicide alone. So I think, as we've probably heard a number of times today, there is no other real silver bullet. You know, herbicide does work, but you better be ready for the long haul, as also been said. We've looked at what can be achieved with multi-year aerial herbicide treatments. And this was a period a while back, but it does demonstrate on the left, if you treat consecutive years, you keep knocking it down. You get to a maintenance level. The question is, when do you ever walk away from that maintenance level? And our experience to date is that we're not there. We're still continuing to do touch-up work on this site as we speak. It's maintaining at about 15% Phragmites cover. You know, that it remains to be seen. I'm sorry, not 15, about 5% Phragmites cover. If we can maintain that by not treating, that'll be a good story. If you don't treat it, as also has been mentioned today, it's going to go back to what it was. And that's shown on the right, where we had initial control, we stopped treatment, and it, you know, came back to be denser maybe even than it was. You know, we still have scattered colonies present. We've reduced it to what are pretty acceptable levels, but this project actually has a 4% success criteria. So we're under a very sort of tight success number to meet in order to satisfy the permit. You know, we've continued using glyphosate. We've tried imazapyr on occasion. We observed a lot of excessive or a lot of collateral damage to desirable species. It did recover, I think, has been stated, but it took several years. And in the end, we think we saw more Phragmites regrowth on areas treated with imazapyr than we've seen with glyphosate, because we did not maintain the imazapyr treatments when we were sort of alarmed at how much collateral damage we had, particularly Sportina alterniflora. Did not like imazapyr very much. We maintain a lot of accuracy in terms of how we treat, where we treat. We utilize onboard GPS systems. This is an example of how we track in a given year, with the flight lines showing, you know, when the spray is being applied. You know, we can plot multiple years and essentially map out, you know, sort of the blanket treatment of the site over time. And just to give you some images of restoration status, if you remember this picture from 1996 from Eagle Island, you know, this is a shot today of that little island from a drone perspective. And this is a photo from, you know, oblique flyby. All of that light, like limey, lemon green is Sportina alterniflora and other desirable species. The areas to the west or to the top of the page are areas that were initially treated, but then taken out of the program, and they've grown back total cover in Phragmites. Just some other comparisons. Treated area on the left, part of the Alloway Creek site, and directly across this road is an untreated offsite area that looked like it did, or the area on the left looked like that prior to treatment. Same thing here, Alloway Creek site on the north, offsite untreated area to the bottom of the page. And just the mapping differential, again, the 96 image, which I showed earlier on the upper page, with all the tan color being the Phragmites coverage, and the 2018 map here showing mostly the greens indicating the desirable vegetative cover. From the standpoint of graphically showing change over time, the red line represents the Phragmites dominated areas of the site, starting off, as I said, up around 60%, and then continually dropping over time down to that 5% level that's shown there on the far right. And at the same time, the increase in Sportina and other desirable vegetation in the sort of the bluish color, increasing. Ironically, the dip there in 2014, or was the imazapyr year, where we had a loss of Sportina alterniflora. So with that, you know, not to say that there aren't some creatures out there that don't like Phragmites stands, and you know, just to provide some seclusion, I suspect. But if anybody has any questions, I can follow up with those now or through my email, which right now is ray.hinkle@akrf.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. We have about 2 minutes for questions. I just wanted to say that a 4% success criteria, that's really ambitious. I can't believe it.
I don't know who agreed to that.
Yeah, that's a lot. And but did you mix glyphosate with imazapyr at
Oh.
all or separately?
No, we've never done that. I think in New Jersey, tank mixes are not permitted.
Okay,
So we have not ever done that.
all right.
And if you
Let's-
ever see my plate on the road, you can flag me down and say hello.
All right, there, can you see the chat, Ray? There are some questions in there.
Yeah, I guess I have to escape
Yeah.
this, right? Where's chat? How do I get there?
Somewhere in your Zoom menu somewhere. If you see the Zoom, I'll ask you the questions
Yeah, that's better.
while you're looking for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Why? Oh, I think you mentioned that already. Why did the percent cover decrease in the no treatment area? I think there was one point in the graph where it decreased in the no treatment area.
Yeah, I'd have to find that one. If I can view it. That was
Yeah, it was a few slides back with the bar graph, I think. It was way back. Yeah, that one. Is it that one?
Asian. That one?
That it
Right,
might be
get this-
that one.
The yeah, no further treatment, it should say. In other words, both of these dropped because they were treated in
Okay.
96, but then this area was not treated further, so it reverted back to its original coverage rather quickly.
All right. And here's a good question. Once the Phragmites coverage is down to below 5% or to 4%, is it possible to change the treatment methods? Do you spot treat?
We spot treat, we're still using a helicopter, and it's a matter of on off, on off, on off. And that's where the benefit of it not of glyphosate not having any collateral effect on the vegetation we're targeting to grow the Spartina flora and other the tidal marsh species, because we're not concerned about an over spray in a sense. So he can fly off flight line and just hit it. It covers the patch, but it has a little bit of drift around it, but it doesn't affect that vegetation. So
Okay. Is there any plan to, when it's down so low, that you would go to manual controls? Or would you?
these sites are so large, like I say, 1,600 acres. Access is pretty poor. Getting a machine out there. There's, the tides, we have to be out there at high tide, because even with these marsh masters and all, you can't drive them at low tide for the most part because of the channels. You get stuck in a channel, you're done. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I think that's all on the questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ray. Appreciate it. Our next speaker, Zachary Simek, is the conservation and GIS analyst for the Nature Conservancy's Adirondack and St. Lawrence Eastern Lake, Ontario prisms. Zachary is a 2013 graduate of Paul Smith's College with a bachelor's degree in natural resource management and policy. Prior to his current role, Zach served as the terrestrial invasive species project coordinator for the Adirondack Prism and guided the management of hundreds of Phragmites infestations in the Adirondacks. Please welcome Zachary Simek.
All right, can you hear me, Bill?
I can, yes. And I can see your slide. You're all ready to go.
Perfect. All right, well, thanks everyone for sticking with us through the afternoon. What a fun frag-filled day this has been. Again, I'm Zach Simic, and I work with both the Adirondack and St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario prisms as our conservation and GIS analyst. And I'm going to share a story about some of our history managing Phragmites in the Adirondacks. And I'm going to call this a cautionary tale about prospects of eradication. Eradication is kind of a taboo word, I guess, in the invasive species management realm, given that it is often sought after, but very difficult to achieve. But before I dive in, I'd like to acknowledge some of the other collaborators on this work. First, Brendan Kurian, who was our former APIP terrestrial coordinator and later manager, who also, or actually started a lot of this Phragmites work in the Adirondacks. And Baron Blasi and Andrea Davalos assisted significantly with the statistical analysis and manuscript preparation for this research. So I'm going to dive in and I'm going to talk a little bit about our history managing this species within the Adirondack region of New York. And then the meat and potatoes of my talk will be centered around eradication and when that is a feasible management goal for this species, and wrap up with some of the lessons that we learned here in our geography. So the Adirondack prism has been working on this species since as early as 2000. But our intensive management work did not really kick off until 2010, when we received funding to administer a landscape level rapid response team. Over the last 10 years, we've performed extensive surveys and control work for Phragmites across our prism and have gradually expanded the footprint of our survey and control work over that decade. To date, we've mapped over 1,800 occurrences of this species throughout the prism. We have treated over 650 sites, and over 430 of our historic management sites have at least 1 year of documented Phragmites absence. So if you were tuned into the previous presentation from New Jersey or any of the others from today's call, we've been talking a lot about very large or established infestations. What sets our region, the Adirondacks, apart is that many of the sites we're dealing with are still very early in the kind of the detection curve. These are small sites where we have a pretty good opportunity to nip them in the bud before they're able to expand. So I'd just like you to keep that in mind as a frame of reference for some of the statistics that I'll share later on in the talk. So to help us keep track of our management work and better assess the outcomes of our control projects, we collect pretty extensive data for each individual infestation, beginning with what we call an occurrence point, which represents a single infestation found on the landscape. This is collected once, and it is maintained throughout the history of management over the next several years. We also collect annual assessments, which help us delineate the size of a patch, and they also include non-spatial information such as the percent cover of Phragmites at the location, habitat type, and so on. And finally, we record treatment information each year to detail what was done at the location, the type of management action that was applied, whether it be mechanical or chemical, and the associated details. So by collecting this assessment and treatment data annually, we're able to pretty effectively track the success or lack thereof of our management efforts throughout the years, and it helps inform our adaptive management process.
Yeah.
So as we've heard on the call today, there are a lot of different management techniques that can be deployed to control Phragmites. And of course, it's always a site and species specific decision on what is the best tool. But in the Adirondacks, we've primarily utilized herbicide as our control technique using two different application methods, one being foliar spray, often for our denser patches, and another being a clip and drip application, which we've typically used in more sensitive areas where Phragmites is interspersed with other desirable native species that we want to protect from off-target impacts. The vast majority of our sites have been treated with a glyphosate product, although we have rotated in some imazapyr or mazamox-based herbicides over time just to change up some mode of action. So I just wanted to throw a quick note in here on restoration. You'll notice that throughout the later slides in my presentation when I'm talking about control, restoration is not something that I'll reference very often. The reason for that being is we have done quite a bit of post-treatment monitoring in our geography and have found that given the small size of the infestations we're treating and the intact surrounding native plant assemblage, that most of our infestations infill pretty quickly just from native seed banks and vegetative expansion of that surrounding vegetation. So we don't do any active restoration. We primarily rely just on passive restoration over time. All right, so now the big question. When is eradication a realistic goal when we're dealing with a species like Phragmites? It's an incredibly difficult question to answer, and it depends on a lot of different considerations and variables. We have to take into account things like the characteristics of the site, its size, and its cover. Consider the regional distribution of the species. If it's something that's widespread across the entire landscape, it's likely going to be much more difficult to eradicate in the long term. Consider our control techniques available to us. We heard in the previous talk, or maybe a few talks ago, how there was some resistance to herbicide. So when we lose certain tools from our toolbox, it might make control or specifically eradication quite a bit more difficult. And then we have things like social political environment that might influence our ability to do certain actions or limit the amount of control work that we can do. And of course, a lot of this is resource dependent, whether that be budgetary resources or personnel. So before undertaking these projects, something that we always do here in our region, and I encourage others to do, is to utilize some type of pre-project planning tool to help more objectively evaluate your control project and help set realistic goals. And this is applicable not just for Phragmites, but for a variety of other species. And it's just as applicable for a small local project as it is a control project at the landscape level. I think far too often we're optimistic, which is both good and bad. And we try to seek that highest level of control, which is eradication, when in many situations, that's probably not an achievable or realistic goal. And we need to set our sights a little bit lower on something like containment and exclusion, or even suppression, and recognize the different levels of resources that are required to advance each of these strategies. The specific tool that we use in our region to do this pre-project planning is IPMDAT, or the Invasive Plant Management Decision Analysis tool. But there are many other alternatives out there that you can utilize. And finally, I'll just share one excerpt from a paper that is kind of getting at this question. So in the early 2000s, there was some research in California by Rajmanik and Pitcairn where they evaluated eradication attempts of 53 different infestations of 18 species. So a suite of a bunch of different invasives. And they found that these invasive weeds were most likely to be eradicated if the infestation was less than 1 hectare in size, so about 2.5 acres. But as we may learn throughout the remaining slides of my presentation, that threshold may be even lower, and making the situation even more difficult when we're dealing with a species like Phragmites here in New York or beyond. So now I want to dive into the research itself and share some of the results of our management work for Phragmites here in the Adirondacks. And going into this project, we had laid out really 3 assumptions, a lot of which may seem pretty common sense if this is a species that you're dealing with or trying to control. So first, we assume that in the absence of any control work or herbicide application, Phragmites would expand in both extent or area and percent cover. We assume that Phragmites would decrease in extent and cover with repeated herbicide applications and as we performed more treatments. And finally, the big one, we assume that Phragmites would become locally eradicated with the number of sites increasing as a function of the number of years under treatment. In other words, the longer we're treating, the more eradicated sites we would expect to find. So I'll preface this, the results here by sharing that this is the result of 7 years of management. So the data that I'll be presenting is from 2010 to 2017. So we now have a couple additional years of data that are not included in this analysis, but we hope to roll in the coming years. And again, just reiterating that this is a 7-year project period. So when we're talking about eradication, we're talking about eradicating the species within that 7-year period. So a pretty tight timeline and a pretty high bar to achieve. And we're using the term eradication when we say that, we're meaning we want to find at least 3 consecutive years of invasive plant absence. And this evaluation will include just about 350 different infestations that were treated. So we can walk through these one by one and take a look at some of the results that we found. So first, let's look at what happens in the absence of management. And it's pretty much what you might expect. So this figure here is showing the expansion of 10 different sites that we monitored over a 3 to 6 year period, but did not control. So you can think of these as kind of our control sites in the experiment. Each panel in this graph represents a different infestation, where we have the number of years monitored on the x-axis and the area of that infestation on the y. And what we found was that generally the size and extent and percent cover does increase over time. However, we did have 3 sites where the area actually remained pretty static, or in some cases even decreased a small amount. And why might that be? That's a good question. There's literature that suggests Phragmites typically expand somewhere between 11 and 46% per year. However, we didn't see that at all of our sites. The rate of expansion was much lower than this rate that was previously reported. So we suspect that this may be due to the fact that our sites here in the Adirondacks are surrounded by a pretty intact native plant community. The level of disturbance in these areas is pretty low, and it might offer a small amount of resistance to the expansion of Phragmites. And in many cases, these are small infestations growing in little pocket wetlands, where the plant may just be reaching the local limits of the wetland area and has basically used up all its desirable habitat. Next, I'll share what happens or what we found after controlling Phragmites, and it's probably exactly what you would expect. So I have here just a visual of one of our management sites. This is probably one of the largest sites that we controlled in our region, coming in at just under 1 acre. Now that's kind of weird to say that a site less than 1 acre is large, but that's the situation we are working with up here in the interior Adirondacks. So you can see here in 2010, on the top panel of this photograph, Phragmites was a very dominant species in this small wetland complex. And we began herbicide treatment at the site, and 7 years later, Phragmites is still present, but only represents a small component of the plant community here. We have a lot of nice natives that have moved back in. So we saw this occur all across our project area for many of our infestations, where the extent of Phragmites decreased, cover decreased, and we were able to locally eradicate many small infestations of this species across the landscape. But we were more successful at some sites than others. So we kind of teased through the data to try to figure out what were the factors that influenced success the most in our particular landscape. And what we found was pretty simple. It's that eradication really depends on the initial extent and cover of the patches that we're trying to control. In other words, the smaller the patch upon detection, and the sooner that we can begin control, the greater the likelihood that we'll be able to eradicate it. So the results of our control work are most likely just what you would expect. This is a figure that is showing the changes in extent or area of Phragmites infestations treated, either intermittently on the left or annually on the right, the x-axis representing the number of years treated. And if you've controlled this species before, this probably looks just about right. So in the first couple of years of control work, we see a pretty significant decline in the extent as that herbicide goes to work and it really begins to reduce the biomass of Phragmites. And then that rate of decrease kind of levels off in the subsequent years, where we begin to have to deal with just these small persistent resprouts that remain. We found that the decrease in extent was greater for sites treated intermittently. However, we don't associate that with the treatment technique, but rather the fact that sites treated intermittently tended to be smaller overall. So this data represents about 300 or so sites that were treated over the 7-year project period. We saw pretty much the same response in the change in cover of Phragmites, where following herbicide application, percent cover decreased very rapidly and dramatically in the first few years, and then leveled out at a low percent cover, and just kind of persisted in the landscape as small vegetative sprouts that returned from root mass. And lastly, here's the kind of the big kahuna, the question that we were really trying to answer in some of this research, which was whether we can effectively eradicate at a local scale Phragmites from the landscape. So what did we find? Well, it's very difficult. We were able to eradicate Phragmites from 35% of our management sites. So this is evaluating sites in our project where we had at least 3 years of data. So we were able to eradicate it at 104 of 294 sites. And we found that eradication is highly dependent on the initial extent of the population and the number of years of commitment dedicated to control, where the smaller the pre-treatment area of a site, the greater the likelihood for eradication in the project period. So for example, we found that our smallest sites, so this is truly small, sites less than 1 square meter. So this is really talking about it like a handful of stems, about as incipient of an infestation as you can find. We had about an 83% chance of eradicating these sites within the 7-year period. As the size of the sites increased, the chances of eradication decreased pretty significantly, where a medium-sized patch, one that was about 45 square meters, maybe the size of an average room in your house, had about a 26% chance of eradication. Where our largest sites, those that were greater than 3,000 square meters, which is still less than 1 acre, only had about a 1% chance of eradication within the 7-year project period. So this speaks very highly to the need for true early detection and rapid response if local eradication truly is your objective for your control work. And we have about 3 additional years of data that we need to reevaluate, and we expect, given the trends that we've found, that a significant portion of our sites will be eradicated from the landscape in the future. So this is a little, you could say, depressing in the fact that we really need to be dealing with some small sites if we want to completely eradicate them. But the good news is that once they are removed from the landscape, the chances of them coming back are relatively low. So we found that after, with 5 or more years of documented absence, there was no reemergence of Phragmites. But I would like to point out here where there was perhaps only 1 or 2 years of absence, we did see a fair amount of Phragmites reappearing at these management sites. So this speaks to the importance of post-treatment monitoring and not just going out, performing one application and stepping away, or else you'll expect that a lot of these plants may return from that rootstock. So what are some of the conclusions that we can draw from this management work? First is that we can eradicate small Phragmites infestations, and I place a lot of emphasis here on small. However, even with these small patches, a long-term commitment of resources is required. So if we look at the distribution of the size classes of the patches or infestations that we were dealing with in this project and kind of bin them out, the vast majority of our infestations that we're dealing with were less than 100 square meters. So 241 of the 346 sites included in this project were under that 100 square meter threshold. And I was trying to think about how to, provide some real world context for this. What does that look like? Half of a double tennis court is about 130 square meters. So even smaller than what's featured here in this slide. So again, very incipient infestations. Those larger Phragmites infestations could not be eradicated within our project period. However, we were successful at suppressing them pretty significantly to the point that native vegetation could return and coexist with this invasive. And that's what we see in a lot of these other projects that have been presented today. Perhaps Phragmites isn't completely removed, but we can reduce it to the point where we're returning some of that native plant assemblage and the services that it provides. And thinking in the long term, eradication of these large populations may never be a realistic or achievable goal. And I would also add in that we should be cautious about drawing conclusions that the reductions in extent and cover of Phragmites alone will produce benefits that we're seeking, right? We're not going out to control Phragmites just because we like killing plants. It's often because we want to restore native plant communities and the benefits and the services that they provide. So this photo kind of captures what I'm trying to get at here. So if we were to just go and manage Phragmites at this site, are we going to restore the native plant assemblage that we're seeking? Likely not, given that there are abundant other invasives present here. So just think holistically, I encourage folks to think holistically about their management approach and consider some type of restoration if there is not an intact assemblage of native species surrounding the site like we have up here. And finally, I'll just share or reiterate the fact that these pre and post treatment assessments are really critical to help better understand the success or outcomes of control work. If not for collecting this detailed data, we wouldn't be able to draw these very specific conclusions about our control work. So at a minimum, some type of record of treatment, record of how much area you're controlling should be collected so that we can really begin to suss out some of the outcomes of our work beyond just things like plants removed, acres treated, or dollars spent, and begin to think a little bit more holistically about things like invasive plant reduction, native species reestablishment, or acres protected. So I'll end with this happy photograph, I guess, of one of our largest control sites, again, where we were able to suppress, but unfortunately not eradicate Phragmites. So a difficult species to control, but with the right tools and techniques, one that we can at least get a grasp on. I think we have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, Zach. That was very interesting. And it reinforces the message we've heard several times today that sometimes eradication isn't feasible and it's like perpetual maintenance at some point. And it's very interesting, your work with Dr. Blasi, the research to determine the size of infestations and the probability of eradication. That's really important stuff to know. Can I can start the questions while you're going over to the chat. One of them was what kind of tools are used with clip and drip? Or
sure, yeah.
Cut and paint. Yeah, what's the tool you had in one of those pictures there?
So we have used several different models, I guess, of injection tools over the years. So we often just clip the stems by hand because we're not really doing this at a large scale. It's a pretty small scale treatment technique. So we'll clip the stems near the base with hand clippers or loppers. In this particular injection tool that you see featured in this slide, this is a JK International stem injection tool, which is more often used for things like Japanese knotweed for hollow stem injection, but we utilize here to fill the cavity with herbicide. There are other commercial injectors on the market that could be used. Another that we have used in the past is the Injector DOS that comes from Great Britain. And then we've also copied together some on our own using, well, what is essentially a veterinary injector.
All right, thank you. Do you reintroduce natives after Phragmites treatment by planting or sowing, or is the rejuvenation of natives voluntary?
Yeah, pretty much all of the recruitment of natives that we see in our region is just passive from the surrounding native plant assemblage, whether that be the seed bank or vegetative expansion. Our former APIT program manager, Hilary Smith, did her master's thesis work on native plant recovery following treatment in the Adirondacks. So using a lot of the sites that I've shared today as her research plots. And yeah, we found basically that given the small size of the sites and the intact communities around them, that they infilled pretty quickly following control with a desirable assemblage of plants.
Okay. I understand that Frag creates new colonies while old ones die off. Does that happen only at a minimum site size?
I'm not really sure I understand that question. We typically, I think I kind of see what you're getting at, but most of our sites are so small and isolated that it is not like, we beat it down in area A and it pops back up in area B. They're typically pretty isolated sites, and when we treat them, they're either gone or they persist as stems in the original extent. Most of the spread that we see in our region is associated with some type of anthropogenic vector.
All right. So you may have answered this one. Do you have any theories about how the new Phragmites infestations are created? Is it by seed?
We suspect that there's very little viable seed spread in our region, and most of the new infestations that pop up are the result of road maintenance activities, whether that be mowing or excavation and movement and use of contaminated fill.
Okay. Do you think there is any benefit to trying for eradication at several smaller sites within a larger area and then suppression for the rest of the area? So I guess some eradicate, so you have a larger site and you eradicate some sections and then suppress the rest?
Yeah, sure. I guess it all depends on your management goal and what the goal of your control work is. Yeah, I guess yeah.
Yeah.
And also it depends, I guess, on the commitment of resources that you want to make in the long term. Because if you target eradication for some small patches, but then don't have the resources to continue to suppress those larger sites over the long term, I suspect that you would just end up with some reinvasion at some point, and those eradication efforts would be mute.
Yes. Yep. All right, Zachary, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your help today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And we have one more presentation. We saved the best for last. We save IMAP invasives for last. We have back by popular demand, Jennifer Dean, invasive species biologist with the New York Natural Heritage Program. Jennifer provides biological expertise for IMAP invasives, which is the state invasive species database. Joining Jennifer is Mitchell O'Neill. Mitchell is the end user support specialist for the invasive species database team at New York Natural Heritage Program. Mitchell provides help and training for users of the IMAP invasives database and the data collection tools, in addition to delivering outreach programs for IMAP invasives. Mitchell received his master's in natural resources from the University of New Hampshire in 2018, where he studied the geographic distributions of terrestrial invasive plants. Please welcome Jennifer and Mitchell.
All right, thank you, Bill. I believe Mitchell is going to be sharing his screen. He's going to advance the slides.
Okay.
All right, are you able to see the?
Yes, that looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. And I know I talked a little bit about the Natural Heritage Program at the very beginning of the day, just to reiterate. So that's where Mitch and I are both housed, and the program facilitates the conservation of biodiversity through information sharing. So on rare species and natural ecosystems and threats to those systems. And so that's where the management of invasive species data component of our program comes into play. And we use IMAP Invasives here in New York as our centralized database for all stakeholders to share invasive species data. A number of other states also use the IMAP system, and this is developed and managed by Listserv. And so many of these features that I'm showing you are for specifically for states who are in the IMAP Invasives network, but you can always reach out to us or Listserv if you're from a different state and you're interested in some of these tools. And so within IMAP Invasives, you can document the presence, the absence, what we call not detected records, and treatment of invasive species. And these can be input as points, lines, or polygons, either through an online browser, which you see a screenshot of here, or through mobile tools that Mitch will be covering here in a little bit. And so why do we want to report treatment data within the system? You know, for the state, we really strive to have a standardized and centralized place to house information about invasive species so that the same data fields are being collected and so forth, because this becomes a great resource for natural resource managers. They can see what other treatments have been going on for particular species across the state. It's this great compilation of treatments and things like that for managers to tap into. And it's also great for record keeping for your own organization. You know, people had mentioned how there can be turnover in staff, and if somebody leaves and they had that knowledge in their head, or maybe their treatment records in a file folder somewhere that now nobody can find, if you have them in one centralized place, then you constantly have that record keeping already taken care of. And of course, measuring that success of treatment efforts is really important. And Zach really hit this home as well, you know, saying that you really need to document those efforts year after year. You know, you go out and you assess something, you treat it, and then you need to do that post-treatment follow-up. And of course, all this information together can help with those regional management decisions. So here's a snapshot of the treatment records that we have in LISMA for all species in IMAP invasives. And so there are about 815 treatment records for close to 50 species that have been documented over the years. And then when I filter that down to Phragmites, there's about 100 Phragmites treatment records. And most of these are concentrated in New York State parks. New York State Parks has been a great partner over the years and helped us actually develop a lot of these field tools for collecting treatment records. And so they've been you know, recording that information for many years. And this provides a snapshot of you know, how much detail you can get on the ground with recording your treatments. So this is an example from Robert Moses State Park, where those the green polygons are presence records that someone has documented the you know, the presence of Phragmites. And you can see there's actually some scattered small green points. So there's large patches, but there's lots of individual records as well of individual plants throughout this area. And then those brown polygons that you're seeing and brown points are treatment records. So this is where somebody has gone in there and actually you know, done some type of management. And so the treatment records within IMAP invasives have two levels. There's the basic treatment fields, which has the target species information, the who, what, where, when, and then your treatment type. And so you can enter in biocontrol releases, physical treatments, or chemical treatments. And then depending on which type you've picked, whether it's biocontrol, physical or chemical, you have a suite of detailed data fields that are available to you with it. And these data fields and what you fill in are actually only viewable within your own organization. Those basic treatment fields are viewable to anyone within the IMAP invasive system, but then these details are actually hidden to just your organizational members and also state level permission viewers. So some of the state agency staff and so forth can also view those. But this is a very helpful way to record that information. This is an example of the chemical treatment fields. So you have things like application method, the surfactant, the specific chemicals that are used and those quantities and so forth. And so this really detailed information actually will come in to play about something that Mitch is going to talk about here in a moment, where we actually can take this information and put it into a format and export it back out to you so that you can use it for making your annual pesticide reporting to the New York State DEC. Another benefit to getting your information into IMAP for your treatments is that there are a lot of different types of reports that the programming can do for you. So you can define a region and get, say, a simple species list by geography, and that can be, you know, species detected or species treated within LISMA or your county or your town. But the infested area and the area treatment report tools are very powerful. They can calculate the area either covered or treated within that selected region and within a certain time frame. And so say I wanted to know all the Phragmites or the area treated for Phragmites for the year 2021, I can do that as long as I have the good polygon data in there that's actually delimiting, you know, the size of those treatment areas. So the better data you get in there, the more powerful these tools are to you with those outputs. And this is something, you know, like Zach was mentioning, you know, that post-treatment monitoring is so important. And so I wanted to hit on that a little bit as well. So, you know, I think we're all very good at being able to assess an area, going out and marking the locations. So, you know, getting that percent cover, getting the extent that the invasive is covering. We actually have a field for the impact of the invasive at that site. So that's something that, you know, we'd like to encourage people to enter. But then once you do that pre-treatment assessment, making sure you get that treatment application recorded so that the areas where you actually did the treatment, and then the post-treatment assessment. So this is really where I feel like we don't get quite as much information because, you know, sometimes grants end once you've done your treatment, or, you know, it just doesn't come up in the priority list to get back out there. But it's so important to know, like, did your populations, you know, are they either gone? Did they shrink in size? Did they grow after your treatment? Was the impact of those invasives actually mitigated? And one of the things that we keep hearing, like, how is the native plant recovery? And so those are the kind of things that are really important. And of course, if you did not find your target species when you go back to survey, say the next year and the year after that, does there come a point where this site can be presumed eliminated? And Zach was mentioning a 3-year time span after treatment. And so you can think in those terms, or some species you might need a longer time frame. But all these data fields can be recorded in IMAP for your treatments and your populations. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Thank you. So to get all your data into IMAP invasives, as Jen was discussing earlier, we've created a couple of different tools that you can use. So on this visual, I have a couple of them listed, and the main idea is that regardless of which tool you use, we configure them all so that the data goes into IMAP invasives, which means that the data you submit can trigger email alerts. The reports that you can run that Jen showed briefly, those would contain and capture the data that you recorded. And also your data will be servable as a web map service. So you can connect to the data you collected and live IMAP Invasive data from your GIS software on your desktop, as well as ArcGIS Online, using those web map services. And you can also display live data on a web map or like your website or something if you want to display data to your partners. Next slide. And we have a table on our website. On my view, it looks like the bottom of the slide's cut off. It might not be for you. It might just be my, oh no, I see it now. It's my computer. So at nyimappinvasive.org/report-invasive, we have a table that goes through all of our data collection tools and the differences in their functionalities and what each app is best for. And I'll go through some of the key differences for reporting treatments now. So you can go to the next slide. And so the tool that's been around for a while, that's the most basic data collection tool, is the basic IMAP mobile app, and that's built for quick, easy data collection. But because of that, it's point data only, and only presents are not detected. So if you want to record treatments, you'll have to use one of our other tools that we provide. So next, the one that's been around the longest is IMAP Invasive Online. So when you log into the online database, there's a button that says create records. So you can use that, and it brings you through creating a record. You can draw polygons and enter treatment polygons. But since this is through a website, you obviously need connectivity. So it works really well on your computer. It can also work on your mobile device, so your phone or your tablet. If you go out in the field somewhere where you have good connection, so if you're on your phone, if you have good service, you could still use the online data entry. But if you need something where to allow you to report data when you are in very poor connectivity, like somewhere remote, one tool we have is the IMAP Survey 123. So this is a survey that we've set up within Esri's Survey 123 app. And basically it replicates all of the options in the Create Record tool online, but in a form format in the Survey 123 app so that you can access it even when you're out in a remote area with no connectivity. And then our last option is the most advanced tool. It's called IMA, which stands for IMAP Mobile Advanced. And it also allows you to do treatments and polygons. But the collector app, you need to have an organizational ArcGIS online account, and typically some GIS experience is also helpful. And as you can see in the picture, you can record all sorts of complex, detailed survey efforts. So because of the complexity and the ArcGIS Online requirement, it's mostly used by state agency and PRISM staff, but it is another option if you want something more advanced. So next slide. Regardless of, you can actually skip this slide too. So regardless of which tool you choose for you, one more slide, sorry. So regardless of which tool you decide is best for you, the first step is to make sure your IMAP account is set up and configured. So you can do that by going to nyimappinvasive.org and click the login button. And we encourage you to use one of our recommended browsers, either Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. And then it brings you to the interface on the next slide. And there are a number of tools. So there's the main menu. You can zoom in and out on the left-hand side. You can create records using that button in the top middle section. And you can move on to the next slide now. Thank you. So in the main menu, there's a couple options like setting up email alerts all the way at the bottom, but the important one to pay attention to if you want to submit treatments is your account. So in your account, there's some basic information on the top. If you hit next, it'll highlight the person ID, which is your unique identifier in IMAP Invasives. And then at the bottom are the organizations and projects. And you can join organizations and projects by clicking the edit button at the top hand right of this page. There's a little edit button with a pencil icon. And go to the next slide, and I'll talk a bit more about organizations and projects. So if you're doing invasive species management as a part of your job, you would usually join that organization, so your employer. A lot of users of IMAP do not have an organization, so citizen scientists and volunteers. But can you hit next? It actually is important to join an organization because you need to join the organization to be able to submit treatments. So if you want to submit treatments, you'll need to search our organization list and join an organization. And if your organization is not listed, you can email us and we'll add it. And there's also an option to join an organization called No Organization Affiliation, New York. And so that's a lot of people who aren't doing invasive species work as a part of their job. Maybe they're volunteers or they are private landowners. But if they join the No Organization Affiliation, it gives you those abilities to create treatment records and some other advanced functionalities. And then projects are an additional way to group data for projects or grants, but they are not necessary for treatments. So next slide, please. And this just, next slide again, please. And so now I'll go through some of the tools in a little bit more detail, just a brief overview of each one. So next for IMAP Online. So on the interface, you can use the Create Record tool. You can use the multi-record searched area button to create a presence and a treatment on top of it. Depending on which treatment type you select, it will pull up the relevant fields. So on the slide, I've selected chemicals, so some chemical treatment fields pop up. And I've selected a satellite imagery base map to aid in sort of drawing the polygons and tracing infestations. So next slide. So those will go directly into the IMAP database. And then you would need to use internet to do that. If you want to do it out in the field without internet, you can try our IMAP Invasive Survey 123. So next slide. You can access, the way you access that is you download the Esri's Survey 123 app, and then you use a URL in your browser to get the IMAP Invasive Survey and open that up in the Survey 123 app. And I'll show you where you can find this information at the end of the webinar. You can go to the next slide. Just to sort of show what it looks like, it pretty much captures all the options within the Create Record tool in the online version, except in a form version. So there's gray boxes for different sections of the form, and those sections correspond to parts of the online data entry. For instance, there's a box for presence records, a section of the survey for not detected, and another section for treatments. And it pulls up all those detailed fields for chemical treatments and other treatments as well that you saw in the past example. And one of the benefits of using this out in the field is that when you, if you click next, so if you click to create your searched area polygon, it will pull up the satellite imagery on the screen on the right-hand side, and you can use the polygon buttons at the bottom to either you can use those buttons to start creating a polygon, and you can either tap points around an infestation using the imagery. So basically like tracing a Phragmites stand that you see on the satellite imagery, or you can use your geographic location. So you can like go up to the edge of a Phragmites patch, drop a point at your location, and then walk around and drop points as you go, and it draws the polygon based on your GPS location. And so you can go to the next slide now. And you can skip this slide too. It just shows you the sorts of things you can record. And so this shows there's a lot of flexibility. You can make really more complex records and also more simple records. So if you hit next maybe 2 or 3 times, you'll see the complex version where you have a searched area with a presence record, multiple different locations within the searched area. So there were 2 green polygons in that purple box, and then 2 more treatment records on top, and you could even have multiple species within each record. So that's like the complicated example with polygons within polygons and multiple records. On the bottom is the more simplified example. So you could just draw the searched area around the infestation, and then there's an option to just copy that polygon for the presence and the treatment. So you could essentially do the whole record with just 1 polygon if you wanted to have a simpler and faster way to record your data. So next slide. And so the last one is IMAP Mobile Advanced. And so you can go to the next slide. This one's a little bit different in the data flow. So instead of going into IMAP directly, it goes into ArcGIS Online, where you then review the record and make sure like the species is correct and the location is correct, and then you check a box saying that it's ready to go into IMAP Invasive, and then it can go into the next crosswalk into the IMAP Invasive database, and it will go in as confirmed. So it takes a bit longer than the online data collection, which is instantaneous, or the Survey 123, which is done on an hourly basis. So it's a longer process, but they go in directly as confirmed. And so next slide. And so just to show you a little bit what it looks like inside, you draw a polygon, and you can add in treatments and presence records to that searched area polygon. And then once you're done, you come back from the field into your office or back home, and you can sync your app to the main map on ArcGIS Online, and that essentially uploads your records to ArcGIS Online. One little note is that you need to preload offline areas when you use this app, so you can't just go out into the field without downloading a base map for that area beforehand while you're still in connectivity. And there's an option to do that within the app. Next slide. We do offer offline base maps that you can use for the whole state. But usually the create offline areas within Collector works pretty well. So this is not necessary for most people, but if you are having problems, you can reach out to us here. And so next slide. And so that was the data collection tools. You can click next a few times. And then next slide. And so the benefit of using any one of those tools is that all of your data will be in IMAP Invasives. And so one benefit to that is that if you record all your treatments in IMAP Invasives throughout the season, then at the end of the season, you can request a report from us. And we have a script that we can run that captures all of your data converts it to the format that DEC needs, and then you can review that and submit the report to DEC. So this is really helpful if you are a certified pesticide applicator, and will help you with reporting to DEC annually. And this is called the IMAP Invasive Pesticide Applicator Report Tool, or IMPART for short. And you access that by emailing us and requesting a report at the end of the season. Next slide. And just to show you where you can find more information on these. So the first two tools I mentioned, the online data collection and the Survey 123, we have help docs for those on our website, because those are accessible to anyone who's interested in using them. So on the URL listed on the left, there's a create record online PDF in the top middle row, and there's also the Survey 123 form help docs on the bottom right icon within that web page. And we also link to our network help site, which has some resources as well. And you can see a screenshot of that on the right. Next slide. So with that, thank you so much. I went a couple minutes over, so I apologize for that, but I encourage anyone who's interested to try out the collection tools before going out in the field. And you can use a species we have set up called stake species and record as many observations as you want without having to worry about messing with the database. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have any questions? I think there's one question in the chat, and you may have answered this. Can you upload shapefiles into IMAP without using one of the apps?
Oh, that's a great question. No, we don't have a way for you to upload shapefiles directly through the user interface. If you have a big batch of data that you've collected with shapefiles using your own system, you can submit that to us for a bulk upload, and then we can upload your whole geodatabase, if you want, into IMAP as individual records with those shapefiles attached. So you would just reach out to us. You can email us at that website, the imapinvasives@dec.ny.gov.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And I see on the screen here, upcoming webinars. There's a big one coming up about spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven. I highly recommend that one to everybody.
Yes, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
Any other, and there's a one the following day. Any other questions from anybody? All right.
Right. Well,
Thank you again, Jennifer. Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you to all of our presenters and to all of our participants. We will send an email to all of you with supplemental resources, including email addresses of the presenters. So if you have additional questions, you can still get them answered. Many thanks to our supporting and co-sponsoring agencies. Thank you also to Polly and Lindsay. And have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye, everybody.